Seasons 5 to 8 of Game of Thrones are largely thought to be the weaker half of the show, particularly the dreaded Season 8. So knowing this, remembering that kind of sinking feeling I had as I was watching the second half of the show the first time I watched it, I went into this just looking for all the positives that I could. I was hoping that maybe on this rewatch I would like it a bit more. I've heard that people, when they do a rewatch, they like the second half more. They think it flows better, so that's exactly what I was looking for. That was difficult to do for a number of reasons, because some of the stuff that I remember actually liking the first time around, I didn't like as much this time around. But also there was stuff that I remember not liking the first time around that I actually did like this time. In the last video, I talked about how D&D were really great at adapting this story, even at adding some elements to that story, but something changed after they were done adapting A Storm of Swords, the third book in the A Song of Ice and Fire series, and more specifically, something changed after the Red Wedding. Some steam had been lost on their part after A Storm of Swords, and that becomes incredibly clear with the next adaptations of the following two books, and more specifically, when they ran out of material to adapt. But there's another, more uncomfortable side of the conversation here, and that's George R.R. Martin himself. Look, I'm not even going to talk about The Winds of Winter and complain about how it's not out yet and how if The Winds of Winter had come out, then maybe everything would have been saved, because I don't even think that The Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring, the next two books, I don't even know if 2 books is enough to finish George's story. That's an entirely separate conversation. But George talks about how he's a gardener of storylines. He's not an outliner. And this makes a lot of sense, considering the story in the books has only gotten larger, introducing new storylines with new characters, all having different motivations and goals from one another. This gardening style of writing also means that he hasn't really started to condense his story. When one storyline or character ends or dies, it's just replaced with a new storyline and a new character. At some point, the story does have to start condensing, though. At some point, Acts 2 and 3 must come along, and George hadn't really done that, so it was up to D&D to start condensing the story. And there's one huge issue with seasons 5 to 8. It's a technicality by some measures, and that issue is time. And I mean that in just about every sense of the word. Time to travel between places, time for character development, time for more seasons, time travel, there's literally everything. So the question I pose in this video is this: would more time have saved this show? And while it might sound like a simple yes or no answer, there is a bit more to it. I'm going to discuss that by going over seasons 5 to 8 in this video, where things went wrong, where stuff went right, what D&D are at fault for, and ultimately what George Martin is at fault for. All of this to ultimately address why I think this show understayed its welcome. So let's go meet the High Sparrow, fight in the Battle of the Bastards, and watch Jaime Lannister go in a complete character circle as we discuss Game of Thrones seasons 5 to 8. Season 5 feels like a whole new beginning to the show. If we're looking at all 8 seasons as a 3-act structure, then seasons 1 to 4 would be the first act, the War of the Five Kings, and season 5 starts us on the second act, which would be the War Against the Dead. So this show and this season very much sets that up to be the central conflict moving forward. Now again, this is somewhat different from the books, because by the end of Book 5, A Dance with Dragons, there still hasn't been too much about the White Walkers. Season 5 of the show loosely adapts both books, A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons. This is because both of these books take place concurrently, with some characters like Jon and Daenerys not even appearing in A Feast for Crows. They weren't going to do that in the show with characters like Jon and Daenerys, but they would do it with a character like Bran. Bran is completely absent during the 5th season, because his storyline was now caught up to where he was in the books. Omitting that storyline in this season honestly felt like one final push to let George R.R. Martin finish The Winds of Winter. Yes, this was all the way back in 2015, by the way. That didn't happen, so the omission of Bran in this season almost ends up hurting the series more in the long run. No Bran flashbacks that could have fleshed out more of the story, but in its place, we do get, weirdly, the only actual flashback of this entire show with a young Cersei and her friend visiting the witch Maggie the Frog. Now, I admire the conviction that the showrunners had to not include flashbacks, to just kind of drop people in on the story and let them figure things out through conversations about the past or whatever, but it makes this scene stand out more than maybe any other scene in the show, because this is the only actual flashback that has nothing to do with Bran. It also doesn't contain maybe the most important part of this scene from the books, which is that of the Valonqar prophecy. The Valonqar prophecy basically meant to Cersei that her younger brother would end up killing her, so naturally, maybe that explains why she didn't like Tyrion for so long. The audience probably thinks, oh, well, Tyrion's gonna be the one to kill her, but technically, Jaime is also younger than Cersei. This was this huge theory going around the internet for a really long time, and people were really upset that the Valonqar wasn't included in that scene, and I'm sure that in the books, whenever they do come out, that will still continue to be a huge part of them. Something about this season just feels different, whether that be the general look or color of the scenes compared to the seasons prior. It seems very clear that something changed during the productions of seasons 4 and 5. Maybe it's because this was the first season that George wasn't heavily involved with, he didn't write any episodes of the season, presumably to focus on writing The Winds of Winter. But it might also be that his relationship with David and Dan started to get a little bit strained. Maybe this is a little speculatory or out of line, but as of right now, we know that 2/3 of the showrunners that George Martin has worked with on TV shows from his universe, he either actively doesn't like or doesn't have a very good relationship with. Now, this warrants almost an entirely other video, but maybe George is a hard person to work with. Even if he is, it's also his world, and usually when he gives the okay on stuff in his world, then those are some of the better seasons or better moments in the show. When he's attached to things like the first 4 seasons of Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon Season 1, and now A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms Season 1, those are like the top seasons in the entire universe. He's been incredibly vocal about his dislike of Ryan Condal. Maybe he's been that vocal now because he wasn't vocal enough about D&D. This is a season where Jon became the bona fide main character. I actually think this is Jon's second best season in the show, him dealing with the newfound power of being Lord Commander, and what that really means gives him some great dilemmas. He also knows the threat that's out there and treats it more seriously, and this comes with some scenes and moments that I think are better than Jon's book counterpart. Yeah, book purists, I said it. Come at me. But on top of all these external conflicts, he also now has this internal conflict with Stannis at the Wall, who's offering to make him a Stark if he joins him on the march to Winterfell. This, along with the ending to this particular storyline, makes this easily the most compelling and best written storyline this season, and it's not really a competition. This is also Stannis' only other good season besides season 2. This season almost makes me a Stannis stan. Almost. His and Jon's dynamic is great. It's a lot like what I would have imagined Ned and Stannis' dynamic to be. There's a code of honor and duty between them, so Jon refusing Stannis' offer to make him a Stark makes Stannis angry, sure, but it also makes him respect Jon that much more. And I just overall found myself much more interested whenever these two are on screen together. There's even a nice moment where Stannis embraces his daughter and calls her the Princess of the Realm. Melisandre says that he should sacrifice her, and he calls her crazy. That's not at all something he would ever do. With the storyline in this season as a whole, they really ramped up the R+L=J hints. Stannis doesn't believe that Jon is the son of a whore because it wasn't Ned Stark's way. Littlefinger tells the story of Rhaegar and Lyanna, and when Sansa says that he kidnapped her, Littlefinger kind of smirks like he knows something else. But honestly, I think all this is paced really well. These are small hints giving us the background info that Jon could be a much bigger player here, and it's great. The only one that's kinda on the nose is Maester Aemon saying,
"A Targaryen alone in the world is a terrible thing."
And Jon walks right in. And of course, there's Sam's,
"He always comes back."
But that wasn't really an R+L=J hint. Jon's whole central plotline involves going north to try and convince the free folk to come south, because if they don't, they're gonna die and join the army of the dead. Again, this is a very interesting conflict, with just about everybody else in the Night's Watch disagreeing with this decision, but with Jon's background and the time he spent with them, it gives him an entirely unique look at the situation. Some would say that it even compromises his decision-making, but the show makes it clear that this decision is heavily based on the threat of the dead, not his personal feelings towards the free folk. I don't know if I wish it, but I think a cool what-if scenario would have been if Alliser Thorne went to Hardhome with Jon. Honestly, I feel like it makes a lot of sense. He's first a ranger, Jon leaves him alone, he could commandeer the Night's Watch and not let them through if and when they came back. It would make more sense to leave Ed in charge to open the gates back up, and if Alliser saw the threat of the dead firsthand, maybe he would have changed his tune. Now, of course, there's the Battle of Hardhome itself, and I'll get to that a bit later. Stannis and Jon's story diverts in episode 5, where Stannis heads south to march on Winterfell, and honestly, Stannis just seems woefully unprepared for this journey. I think the point, especially in episode 9, is that all of Stannis' faith was put into the wrong person, into the wrong religion, but it kind of makes him seem like an idiot, not just a religious fanatic. I don't really want to talk extensively about the burning of Shireen because I hate even just editing this portion. It's tragic and just all around messed up on all fronts. Props to the actress on those screams. It's right up there with Aaron's in Midnight Mass. But it does intrigue me that this was the first of 3 things that George told D&D that absolutely shocked them. So from George's mouth, open to the public, Stannis is going to burn Shireen in the book. I wonder how that will be framed, how different it'll be if, we ever actually get the Winds of Winter.
If you'd had to choose between Rhaenyra and Aegon, who would you have chosen?
I wouldn't have chosen either.
Me too, girl. Me too. In typical fashion, things get worse for Dany this season. She's without her dragons, without her greatest friend, she has an uprising forming in the city, and she soon loses even more of her council, which only paves the way for a new person to advise her, Tyrion Lannister. I think a lot of this stuff sounds good on paper, but the execution of Dany's whole storyline this season just comes across a little cheap. The Sons of the Harpy are the most ridiculous entity in the entire show. This rebellious group is supposed to be former slavers, and they're armed with daggers, they have no training, and yet they take out the Unsullied like it's nothing. I mean, it's a good thing that Dany didn't pay for this army, because they don't seem all that great to me. I will say that Barristan actually does put up a good fight, but it's still a stupid death. Now, the character of Daario had a lot of potential, particularly in this season. Was he going to betray her? Was he truly in love with her? Would he throw it all away for another? None of this is ever properly explored. And I don't even want to get into the whole Daario equals another person theory, but I do feel like he was underutilized. And if the opposite was to happen and he was going to be utilized properly, then sure, I would have been fine if he actually did end up being Euron Greyjoy. He was essentially the devil on her shoulder during this time. She was without Barristan or Jorah or any sort of council. With the way things ended for Dany, I feel like Daario could have had a much bigger impact on her than he did. Go see my Abandoned Storylines video for more on that. But the other half of the storyline is Tyrion on his way to meet Dany. But Tyrion is both bored and boring for about 70% of this season. Varys wants him to serve Daenerys, and Tyrion says sure. Why? What does Tyrion gain from this? Why would he even want to do this? Without his inner thoughts, we don't see any reason for him to do this, and the dialogue doesn't help us give him any reasoning to want to help her. I think it would have been really great for Tyrion to lean into the whole drunken midlife crisis before he sharpens up and decides he wants to try and help Dany right this world. This could have been done in like an episode or two as well. He says that this is what he went through, that he didn't want to continue on until Varys convinced him that Dany was worth fighting for, but we never really saw that inner conflict happen. Did it happen off-screen in between seasons? No, it didn't, because Tyrion didn't even know about Dany until the first episode. There's some great moments, like when Tyrion can't take the hand of the girl in the brothel, but it overall just seems like he's moving along because the plot needs him to. Tyrion and Jorah are another pretty underrated duo. I believe that going through Valyria is a cool change from the books. We never even sniff Valyria in the books, even though there's so much about it and people want to see it, we never do. I also think that Jorah being combined with Jon Connington from the books and foregoing the whole young Griff storyline was certainly a choice, but I actually think combining it here works fairly well. Again, I think I have to blame George for this one. George talks a lot about really cool stuff, but he never really gets to the cool stuff. He never really shows it, and I think that's because the promise of better stuff coming has been keeping the book fans alive for literal years. But I don't blame the show, and I don't blame D&D for going forward with some of these more major moments and combining storylines, especially if George himself wasn't sure where those storylines were going. Now, both of their storylines get a boost in quality when they first meet. The lobotomy of Tyrion hadn't happened yet, so him advising her and talking about realism for her actually makes for some really great scenes. Part of why the episode Hardhome was as highly rated as it was is because this was the first time we saw Tyrion and Dany interact. In terms of big characters meeting each other for the first time, their scenes together in this episode are really well done. And again, this is not something that has happened in the books yet, but I think this is another great change. The story has to move forward. It can't just be constantly teased of more important things coming in the future. The first bit of Tyrion's lobotomy comes from the episode directly afterwards in the fighting pits. He tells Dany that she should stop this fight so that way Jorah doesn't die. But in the episode prior, he tells her that he cannot be by her side, and he even emphasizes the importance of the Marine traditions like the fighting pits, but also tells her to stop them to save Jorah. And after finishing the series, this contradiction by Tyrion was just a sign of more things to come. Everything about the fighting pits feels like it happens because this is episode 9 and something big needed to happen. Sure, Dany flying on the dragon is cool. That actually does happen in the books, but the Sons of the Harpy seem to just show up when the plot needs them to, and then they just disregard them other than that. But once again, the strong beats the quick in this fight. Also, go Ian Glenn for doing his own fight scenes here. It definitely makes a difference. I know she didn't pay for them, but she still paid way too much for the Unsullied. These guys suck. The CGI for the dragon was also terrible here. Really makes me think that the budget for those last 2 seasons all went towards the dragons. I do love the fact that Drogon burns an Unsullied here, just proves that he's still a young dragon with a lot of training and growing up to do. Also, can we finally talk about the fact that naming a dragon Drogon is just really stupid, even ironically? I get it's named after Drogo, but what about like Calon or Drogar or something like that? But if you could guess it, yes, Dany ends yet another season on a low note, further from Westeros than she's basically ever been. Arya's storyline was a huge indicator at the show progressing into the second act of the story. Something that was previously set up is now being fulfilled. While Arya was of course a big character in the show, she was promoted to an actual main character in this season capable of carrying a storyline herself. And this storyline had the most potential out of literally any storyline this season, and it sucks. The House of Black and White is such a mysterious and magical element to the story, but it's incredibly underwhelming across the 2 seasons it appears. Was the waif just the only other one there when Jack and Hagar was gone? Is there only one faceless man, or 2 because one of them dies? This whole storyline just feels empty. This kinda should have been a whole new, like, Castle Black storyline, a whole new hero's journey story. Some people might say, well, yeah, but we already saw that. But the storyline is still doing that anyway. It's just doing it in a worse way. It's like they stripped that storyline out of any budget or scale that it could have had. I guess you could say all the other faceless men are just out on missions, but there's more faceless men in the book at the House of Black and White, and it just really feels like they were cutting corners here in the show. There's also not a whole lot of explaining what this house is, what it's here for, how this magic works, the point of the faceless men, nothing. This is really highlighted by the episode Unbowed, Unbent, Unbroken, which at this point in the show was the worst episode by a long shot. We expect to get some sort of answers because the first 20 minutes of the episode are all about Arya. There's some cool shots, I guess a reveal of the faceless hall, but it's kind of just like, okay, what now? What's the point of this and where is it all going? She finally gets a job in the episode Hardhome as an assassin, and again, this is pretty great. I think I kind of accepted all this because I figured we'd learn more about the Faceless Men as time went on. We didn't, and I'll talk about this more in season 6. Now, I love her, but Brienne sucks at her job. She finds both of the Stark girls and doesn't get either of them under her protection. But honestly, I don't blame either of them. She really didn't have a plan other than just telling them that she knew their mom. Dressed head to toe, literally, in armor and weaponry given to her by the Lannisters, there's no reason for either of them to have gone with her based on her word alone. Sansa going from Joffrey to Ramsay has to be the worst dealt hand that anyone has ever been dealt ever. This very much just feels like it was the only way they thought they could keep Sansa in the story, but honestly, even in terms of fictional storytelling, this seems like too much. I think just about anybody will tell you that the top 2 villains in this show are Joffrey and Ramsay, and having Sansa romantically involved with both of them is just nonsense. Every other character in this series, to this point, has had highs and lows. Sansa has quite literally just had lows. I feel lonely and depressed watching any scene from her point of view in this season, and yeah, that's the point here, but it's just not an enjoyable feeling to watch when a character has been kicked to the curb at every opportunity and they're still getting kicked while they're down. Sansa replaces Jean Poole, who is posing as Arya Stark in the books, and yeah, I kind of get that they didn't want to do this whole other complicated subplot, but there's other stuff Sansa could have done. They literally made up a whole Dorne storyline for Jaime this season. Sansa could have just stayed at the Vale, learned more about politics and playing the Game of Thrones, had her go try and find Rickon or something. Hell, they could have just withdrawn her character from this season entirely the way that they did to Bran. There is some good that comes from this story. Sansa and Theon's relationship and dynamic is formed here, but honestly, it would have been cool to see Sansa take on a bit of a Marjorie role here, learning how to manipulate Ramsay. And Ramsay does continue to be an excellent character. He really does have this very friendly demeanor and smile, which I think makes his character so haunting. Huge props to Ewan Rion on his performance here and this character. I think that show Ramsay is better than book Ramsay. If Theon admits to her that he didn't kill Bran or Rickon, it would have been the perfect time to bring her out of this storyline in episode 5 or 6, have her go to Brienne and go looking for Rickon. She still gets the interaction with Theon, learns a bit more about his past, and doesn't have to go through such terrible circumstances that landed the show in its first huge bit of controversy. Also, another thing I realized, I love that a big part of Theon's arc in this portion of the show is that he's not that bad because he didn't actually kill Bran and Rickon. It was just, two whatever farm boys, and suddenly that's supposed to change Sansa's opinion of him. Alright, time to get this one out of the way now, and I hate saying that because the whole Dorne storyline on paper sounds pretty good. This is the most Attack of the Clones type storyline in the show, meaning that when you hear the plot, it sounds great, but the execution is very poor. But similarly to Arya in the House of Black and White, this storyline also seems particularly empty and like they're cutting a lot of corners. Don't even get me started with the amount of characters that they cut from the book in this season, in the Dorne storyline, but this whole storyline feels like an afterthought. Even just the Dorne part in the intro animation sucks and makes the whole kingdom seems like it's just a garden and a balcony. Jaime and Bronn on a buddy cop journey to get Myrcella back seems like it could be filled with good moments. And honestly, there are some good moments between these two. But this ultimately just ends up being Jaime's worst season so far. And yes, that's including season 2, where he spends 70% of it off screen in a cage. But I think what makes this storyline bad on a fundamental level is if everything the characters are doing goes right, then it just means that Jaime returns to Cersei, which is something that we don't want. The Sand Snakes get a lot of flack, so I went into this knowing that, and I was like, you know what? I am gonna do everything I can to like this storyline. And I can tell you that I was genuinely surprised going into it with that mindset that this storyline still sucks. There's this fight in the middle of the palace grounds that somehow Jaime and Bronn got to. If the choreography of Oberyn was bad last season, then I imagine this is what that fight would have been had Oberyn been untrained and had like 5 different stunt doubles for him. This is far and away the worst fight of the series. Not to mention how this entire storyline basically comes down to a misunderstanding, and Doran Martell is just like, okay, yeah, Myrcella, yeah, she can go with you. It's all good. Sure, the ending is shocking, it's tragic, but it also makes this entire journey essentially meaningless. With the exception of one scene in season 7, this entire storyline could be cut from the show, and we could have never seen Myrcella again, and nothing changes. One of the only other relative highlights this season is everything with Cersei in King's Landing. Cersei is losing her power. She doesn't have the titles anymore, she doesn't have control over her son, she doesn't have her daddy anymore, and it's great to watch her just mentally unravel. However, this also brings what I believe to be another one of the weakest storylines or arcs of the entire series, and that's the Sparrows. The High Sparrow himself and Jonathan Pryce as an actor are great, but ultimately feel like wasted potential. I get having this slow burn villain that you don't know how to think about, but the High Sparrow isn't like any other villain or side villain, and not in a good way. We know that people like Littlefinger or Varys have different motivations. There's hints all throughout the season that the High Sparrow is the same way, but it felt like you were just waiting for the big moment, that big reveal where we find out who this guy truly is and what his true motivations are, and that moment simply doesn't exist. There's also the absolute butchering of House Tyrell. Instead of expanding upon this great House of Westeros by introducing Loras and Marjorie's brothers, or even just giving their role to Loras, both Marjorie and Loras are imprisoned in the middle of this season, and subsequently appear in a combined 6 more episodes of the series. Now, part of this is definitely just the scrubbing of characters deemed less important, but part of this is actually the fault of these 2 actors. Both Natalie Dormer and Finn Jones wanted out of the show. There's always people who want to leave big series to go and chase other roles. It's only natural when it comes to any big show, as it's only natural for the common person to never see them in anything ever again. So it's unfortunate that both of these actors came from the same house in this show, honestly, this would have been a good time to introduce either Garland or Willis Tyrell if D&D wanted to, continue this story, but they clearly didn't. The season building Cersei up and having her own actions be her downfall is immensely satisfying to see. It seems like this season made it a point to now show Cersei as the next big-brained Lannister. But in fact, it did the opposite. She's not her father, and she's destroying her own house. And of course, Lena Headey absolutely kills it here. I can't emphasize this enough, but having Jon go to Hardhome is the single greatest change from the book to the show. Jon in the book has never seen a White Walker. In fact, by the time Jon becomes Lord Commander in the book, the only time he ever saw a White was back in the first book. Having Jon be the center of the White Walker cause to unite the people against them doesn't actually make that much sense in the book, because he isn't at the center of the cause. Having Jon actually go to Hardhome, see this threat up close, see what the consequences really are, is such an excellent change for his character. This episode was directed by Miguel Sapochnik, who subsequently became the go-to person for big episodes of the show. And he even became the showrunner for season 1 of House of the Dragon.
I've got to say, Severance is awesome. I love that show.
If I'm HBO, I'm giving this dude a blank check to make a new Game of Thrones spin-off. Everything he touches that he's in control of turns to gold. I'll touch on The Long Night and the Bells later in the video. This whole battle is entirely unexpected in so many ways. First off, like I said, this doesn't happen in the book. This isn't a big battle episode, this isn't a singular point of view episode, this is episode 8. So the show is clearly waiting for the big fight scene to happen in episode 9. That's what all the other seasons have done, so even the most hardcore of audiences were surprised by this episode. The episode is framed as this Thenn being the bad guy. Even the trailers show us some fight between the wildlings and the Night's Watch that just never happens. Carsey has to be the best one-episode wonder in the entire series. She has a better character arc in this single episode than like 70% of the characters get throughout the series. I also, on this rewatch, forgot that even by this point, Jon and Tormund were still pretty rocky. They didn't have this dynamic that they have in future seasons. This episode was actually a huge moment for Tormund in terms of character development.
This is the way.
The beginning of this entire sequence is tense, and then we see things that just never happen again, like all these people disappearing in a matter of seconds. Jon commanding the Night's Watch to go with him and fight is so badass, and it's just crazy to think that less than 10 episodes ago, they were fighting each other. The Four Horsemen is pretty on the nose, but whatever. One uses this big wooden pole as a weapon. I sure hope that in the next fight he's a part of, they give him an actual proper weapon. And Jon versus random White Walker number 4 very much feels like the final battle between hero and villain. This is what people wanted out of Jon versus the Night King, but honestly, I don't think they'd even be able to top this. This is, unfortunately, the greatest fight that we ever got against the White Walkers. But watching this episode again is far better. This isn't a battle. This is a massacre. The only person who's actually killing anything in this entire sequence is Jon Snow, because he's using Valyrian steel. Speaking of which, this episode told us that Valyrian steel kills White Walkers, which, believe it or not, is not confirmed in the books. We know that Dragonglass does the trick because of Sam, but Valyrian steel is not yet confirmed in the books, and this was just the best way possible of revealing that. It proves that Valyrian steel and the magic involved in it is directly correlated to the magic of the White Walkers. Dragons, in some sense, are directly involved in the destruction of the others. It's like this whole thing is some sort of tune or song of ice and fire.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme, hopefully it'll work.
It totally changed the landscape of the swords as we know it, who has them, how to get them, the swords in the spin-offs, and cemented Jon Snow as the true main character of the show. Yes, I will say that again, make that plain as day. Jon is the main character of the show. I think David and Dan knew exactly how they wanted to write him and make him the main character, and this was made very clear from this moment onward. The Night King's powers were a massive reveal, but have actually been hinted as far back as the prologue chapter in A Game of Thrones. Also, this Night King, played by Richard Brake, to me, I don't know, it looks far more intimidating or scary than the one played by Vladimir Furtick. This might just be a me thing that I noticed, because a lot of people probably didn't even realize they were played by different actors. And having this actual face of the enemy, of the dead, was another good decision. That might be an unpopular opinion, but I like that the show actually has a Night King. This is my personal favorite episode of all of Game of Thrones. I love this battle, how unexpected it is, and I think the other storylines in this episode are also all really great. One thing I've always noticed and get really bothered by, and I'm actually not sure if people want to know this or not because it might ruin some of these scenes for you going forward, especially if you're a gamer, but every time a White Walker is killed in this show, they play the same sound effect, and it's actually the Halo Overshield power-up sound. Alright, while editing it does seem a bit quiet, so let me overlay the clips once again and do it where it starts, and then I'll stop it when the sound stops, and maybe go back and see if you can hear it again. So yeah, sorry for ruining that for you. I remember all the conversations on Reddit were saying that this is the last time possible that Lady Stoneheart would be introduced, and the agony that came afterwards when she wasn't. There's one word that I have that comes to my mind when I think of this episode, and the word is silly. There's just no way to stand behind Stannis, but to not even give him an on-screen death is pretty silly. Having Sansa light the candle as soon as Brienne walks away is silly. Miranda being this Harley Quinn character is kinda silly, but I'll forgive it for, reasons. Sansa and Theon surviving jumping off the battlements of Winterfell is silly when we just saw what a fall from that height would actually do to somebody. Making Meryn Trant a torturous
little kid lover
when he was a character we already didn't like is also over the top and silly. By the way, Ian Beattie, who plays Meryn Trant, is at like every Comic-Con ever. I've always heard nothing but great things from friends and people who have met him online. I'm sure he gets a lot of hate online, maybe not so much anymore, but especially for this episode. But make sure you aren't that person, and if you're ever at a Comic-Con, go talk to him. I'm sure he'd love to talk to you as well. I'm honestly really unsure why Arya taking the faces is treated like such a big reveal. We literally know that this is what happens. I'm not sure how her face is on this body. I'm not sure why they didn't use this opportunity to reveal Syrio Forel as a faceless man when the actor is available and has talked about how he wanted to come back, and that's one of the most plausible theories in the A Song of Ice and Fire community. This whole scene, silly. This scene isn't actually silly at all. Great writing. You can tell that the Dorne storyline was such an afterthought because the whole Jaime revealing to Myrcella that he's her father is so laughably awkward, and even an actor like Nicolás Coster-Waldau can't save this scene. Also, they're literally right on the border of Dorne. Why wouldn't they just turn the ship around to even try and get some help? Bronn already knows what this poison is, he'll know who gave it to her, Doran would arrest her, boom, end of storyline. It's just silly. This whole storyline this season was just the writers winging it. I'm glad this wasn't a sign of things to come because D&D just never winged anything ever again. Dany getting cornered by Dothraki isn't silly. This brings her back to her roots of the show. It's a very dangerous situation, and it works very well. Cersei doing her walk of shame isn't silly. It actually made me feel bad for her, believe it or not. It was a traumatic and hard to watch scene. Also, Robert Strong is a menacing force in this scene, and a lot of scenes to come. I think this is a more underrated portion of horror in this story, and I think it's actually done pretty well here. Jon Snow's stabbing and mutiny makes total sense. I believe that Alistair Thorne is doing this because it's what he believes to be best, but you can also see both sides of things. Jon's death felt weird in the grand scheme of things. This wasn't in episode 9, this wasn't at the end of season 1 or season 3, this was at the end of season 5, a time where the show is in the second act, and all things, I don't know, just felt fishy. Funny, those last 3 storylines that I talked about are also where we leave off characters in the books, meaning that those 3 were the endings adapted from the page, you know, D&D's strong suit. This was certainly a weaker season of the show. It still is, but now unfortunately, it's far from the weakest. The Wall and everything with Jon was phenomenal, Dany's story has bits and pieces that are great, and every other storyline ranges from complete dog water to promising setup for what's to come. But I can't rate this season based on the fact that a lot of these storylines had bad conclusions. The writing, sure, it took a dip in some areas, but there were also improvements in other areas. I'm giving season 5 of Game of Thrones an 8.5 out of 10. So I remember every single aspect about the whole off season of when this season was coming out. I remember Kit Harington saying he wasn't coming back. I remember the leaked images from super far away that could have been Kit Harington on set. I remember the marketing purposefully avoiding Kit, but highlighting the character of Jon and other dead characters. And to this day, and everybody should have trust issues when it comes to anything actors say. I think that's become a bit obvious now with things like Andrew Garfield saying he wasn't going to be in Spider-Man and stuff like that. But back in 2016, this kind of seemed like an anomaly when people would ask, Kit Harington if he was going to be in it, and he swore up and down that he wasn't. That was the first bit that I kind of remember in my lifetime of an actor just flat out lying to the public. Season 6 was special because this whole season was uncharted territory. There were no books to base the plot off of. This was just solely David and Dan's writing. And that, of course, has a bit of a negative connotation around it now, but in this season, I feel like the story of the season is a lot of what the meat of the Winds of Winter book will eventually be. But more importantly, I also think these are the parts of the Winds of Winter that David and Dan were actually passionate about telling. I think they were a bit excited to finally tell their own version of the story, to just take the notes from George Martin and be like, all right, well, we like this, so let's do that. We don't like this, so we're just gonna cut that character or kill them off. And I think that, to them, was maybe a bit freeing. They kind of used season 5 as a means to skip ahead and get to this season, so that way they could probably tell something a bit that they're more passionate about once again. While season 3 and 4 feel like part 1 and part 2 of the same season, they both kind of stand on their own. And season 5 and season 6 also kind of feel like part 1 and part 2, but season 5 doesn't really stand on its own without the conclusions and the stuff that happens in season 6. This is also, among a lot of fans, considered to be one of, if not the best season of the show. So I remember feeling that way as well. I was excited to dig back in and see if I still felt that way. But upon this rewatch, I find season 6 kind of funny. A lot of the beginning of the season, especially the first episode, is just David and Dan killing off characters that they just don't want to deal with anymore or have no idea what to do with. Everyone hated the Dorne storyline last season. Good, we're killing them off in the first episode. The North storyline needs to move along now. Good, we're gonna kill off Roose Bolton and move that plotline as forward as we can. Everybody's been asking about Rickon and Osha and where they went. Well, they're back. For a little bit. The Blackfish is kind of this loose end of the Red Wedding. Yeah, he's back for a little bit. There were very few storylines that D&D actually had interest in telling, but those were the highlights of this season. So let's start off with the biggest storyline of the season, and that is, of course, everything to do with the North and Jon Snow. The resurrection of Jon Snow was, of course, the first thing on everybody's mind, so the show addresses that immediately by getting his body out of the snow and into some room at Castle Black. But on this rewatch, I found myself asking, why did they do this? In a storyline where they've made it a point that you have to burn the dead, I think a lot of people, myself included, gave this a bit of a pass because we wanted to see Jon come back to life and we kind of expected it to happen, but it actually doesn't make a lot of sense. Some of the Night's Watch stay behind a door because they're loyal to Jon. Sure, I guess. But it doesn't make any sense that they would want to take his body to try and preserve it. Tormund is the only one to make any sort of sense of it when he says we need to burn his body by nightfall. But suddenly, Davos asks Melisandre to raise Jon from the dead. Why? How? Davos has no idea that this could happen. Sure, he's seen some magical stuff and Melisandre do some magical stuff, but he's never seen anybody bring anybody back to life. He also just doesn't have any sort of allegiance to Jon whatsoever. It would make way more sense for Melisandre to do this on her own accord. She knows the Lord of Light can bring people back to life because she's met Beric, she has seen Jon in the flames as the possible Azor Ahai. It would make way more sense for her to try and bring him back herself, because it's just the thing that she thinks the Lord of Light wants her to do. This reeks of D&D wanting Davos to play a bigger role in the show, and I love Davos, don't get me wrong, but the whole character arc he has in this season just doesn't really make sense. That being said, I remember being in my basement screaming my heart out when Jon came back. I can't help but think of that moment anytime this happens, so you know what? I love this. Ghost getting up, giving the audience one last glimmer of hope until it finally happens. It was a pretty great twist when it happened. I've got a lot of nostalgia for it, so I like it, and I will mostly give it a pass. But now that the show's over, a big complaint is that Jon doesn't change from his resurrection. In the grand scheme of things, I do think that's true, but I think in these first few episodes, he does a bit of changing, like forsaking the Night's Watch and even his own leadership role against the White Walkers. I think it would have been cool to expand on this, but the show doesn't really do that. Ed asks him if it's still him in there, even doubles down on it, but Jon doesn't really change in the grand scheme of things. You could skip his death and just think he's a Night's Watch deserter, or that he took Stannis' offer to become a Stark, and his whole character arc actually makes more sense that way. Death in this world is supposed to change a person. Lady Stoneheart, granted she's not in the show, is completely different when she comes back. Even Beric in the show says that he loses a piece of himself every time he dies, but Jon doesn't have any sort of further internal conflicts that differ from pre-death to post-death. Jon's storyline was, for 2 seasons in a row now, so obviously the primary storyline that when he wasn't on screen or when he wasn't in an episode, you could feel his absence. The whole season is leading to this battle at Winterfell, so much so that it feels like Jon leaves the Night's Watch just so that way they can get that storyline started. This might be a hot take here, but one of the things this rewatch made me realize is I actually have a lot more respect for Alistair Thorne. He's a much more fleshed out character than I remembered him to be, and I actually do see his point. How can he and the other Night's Watch members trust the wildlings? He's been fighting them his whole life, he hasn't seen the threat beyond the wall, and now this kid who he doesn't like and doesn't believe in just lets them ride south of the wall. He stands by this decision to the end, and honestly, I think he might be like a top 5 villain of this show. Jon and Sansa's reunion is, crazily enough, far and away the best Stark sibling reunion. This also feels like the most realistic of the reunions to happen in the books. The two siblings who didn't like each other being the ones to actually reunite is great, and another thing that I think George will write in The Winds of Winter, but probably under different circumstances. The pink letter he receives from Ramsay does the job, but it's not as intriguing as the books. I don't want to get super into this, but Jon receives this letter before his death, intimidating and pressuring him to ride south and attack Winterfell, but the thing is, it might not have been Ramsay who even sent this letter. At this point, Stannis is still alive, Mance Rayder is still alive, and it's heavily theorized to have been written by one of them in order to get Jon and the Night's Watch to come and join the fight against Ramsay. And Jon in the books even accepts this taunt, and it's one of the reasons that he's killed. But this letter acts as the inciting incident for this plotline going further, so like I said, it does its job. Sansa finally has a change of luck this season. She stands up to Littlefinger, convinces Jon that they need to fight and take Winterfell back, and overall just finds her strength. And after the entire series thus far, this is a great change of pace for her character. I was never really team Sansa when I first watched, but I think on this rewatch, I definitely am now. I remember a while ago there were theories of Jon and Sansa marrying to unite the North, and I almost think that they were trying to set that up in this season. And from this leaked footage, it seems that storyline was just entirely cut out. Now let's take it back a bit and talk about the ending of episode 1, where it's revealed that Melisandre isn't exactly how she appears to be. Unfortunately. It's explained that this necklace is what gives her her appearance, but back in season 4, episode 7, Melisandre isn't wearing the necklace at all, so I think that D&D just kind of forgot about this one. This is a cool reveal to end the episode on, but what does this actually do for the story? I guess it proves more so that the one true God is the Lord of Light, but this doesn't amount to anything or even change the story in the slightest, and I think people probably just altogether forgot about this. This truly was just a shock value twist. Ramsay and Ewan Rian carry a lot of the bad storytelling in Winterfell. I said it before, but I think that Ramsay in the show is better than in the books, and a lot of that is due to this performance, but he can also almost mask the bad writing here too, which is really saying something. And what I mean by bad writing is reintroducing Osha and Rickon just for Osha to die in the next episode, Rickon to literally never speak and die, and again, these are reintroduced to close that storyline. And here's where I talk about Osha and the trajectory of her whole character arc. Osha should have just had Mira Reed's character arc. Mira and Jojen don't really do anything. I guess Jojen does a little bit, but they bring him north, I guess. But that's what Osha was doing anyways. Osha should have just gone with Bran beyond the wall, been the one to tell Hodor to hold the door, be the one to kill a White Walker, everything. Because Mira doesn't do anything and doesn't amount to anything. She's just another cut character in the storyline. Justice for Osha, she could have and should have been a top 10 character in the entire show. So in this season, there's a lot of new or smaller storylines, so instead of just ignoring them or giving them their own tiny little sections, I'm just gonna combine them all here, rapid fire style. So Theon and Sansa have escaped Winterfell, but the guards are close on their tail. So Theon sacrifices himself by telling them Sansa died, just for them to quite literally go around the corner and find her. It's a pretty hilarious scene. But Theon takes us to the Iron Islands, where D&D attempt to give them a bigger storyline, but they're in this section for a reason. Euron showing up and killing Balon seemed to prime him to become the next true villain of the show, and it does seem that way. Ramsay was introduced before the death of Joffrey, now Euron is introduced before the death of Ramsay, and honestly, I just feel really bad for this actor. Once upon a time, he said that his character would make Ramsay look like a little kid, and if we're talking about book Euron, then yeah, that would make a bit of sense. I'm not really gonna go too in-depth about Book Euron, but this is the most different character between the book and the show, and had D&D actually wanted to explore this character and where he goes and what he goes on to do, then he would have been a villain on par with Joffrey and Ramsay, not just this weird, unfunny Jack Sparrow knockoff. The King's Moot is supremely underwhelming. In the books, it's described far differently, far more vibrant and just overall entertaining, but D&D just didn't care about this storyline. I do think that there were some building blocks for Euron to be a different character, possibly more akin to the book version, but his dialogue is still 90% cock jokes and just cringy dialogue. Alfie Allen continues to impress, though this season hardly seems interested in his character or the Iron Islands as a whole. Sam and Gilly go to his home and we see how nice Sam's mother and sister are, and honestly, even his brother, he's not that bad. It's very nice to see like a nice family and just overall nice people in this world, and it's easy to see who Sam takes after. But on the opposite end, we are reminded that this is Westeros when we see how awful his father is. And all of this is actually very well written. Randall Tarley is honestly the closest thing we've had to Tywin, I think purposefully so, but this scene is so tense. The dynamics are intriguing to see unfold, and this is honestly one of the better scenes in this entire season. Very heavy seasons 1 to 4 vibes here. I honestly would have taken an entire Samwell story here just to see these dynamics continue to unfold. But the main point of Sam's entire story here is that he takes Heartsbane, the Valyrian steel sword of House Tarly. And if I am being completely honest here, Heartsbane might be my favorite Valyrian steel sword that we've seen on screen. Above all of the others in this show, in House of the Dragon, I don't know, something about this sword just kind of speaks to me. So I'm going to have a hot take here to discuss later in the video, mostly due to how cool I find this sword, so just prepare yourself for that. In addition to the Northern storyline, we know that they need men for that fight, so we're given 2 additional options, the Knights of the Vale and the Blackfish and all of his men at Riverrun. We see Littlefinger go to the Vale, where he says it's time for the Knights of the Vale to join the fray, but who knows if we can really trust him, and then we spend actually a pretty significant amount of time at Riverrun with Brienne meeting the Blackfish. Now personally, I thought it would have been very cool to see the Tullys and the Blackfish go up north, but just like most characters in Season 6, the Blackfish is reintroduced and swiftly killed off, with the storyline essentially going nowhere and meaning nothing. I also just don't really believe that the Blackfish would abandon Sansa to stand and die himself. I almost feel like him going north alone with Brienne and Podrick would have been fine, but I just don't think that the Blackfish was a big enough fan favorite character to bring him around long term. I mean, I guess they at least brought characters back at this point in the show, at least gave them a conclusion, because most characters from here on out don't get this treatment. Last season gave us the hugely anticipated meeting between Tyrion and Daenerys. So what does this season do? That's right, it separates them for 80% of the season. Jorah gets a new duo partner with Daario, and again, I think this works. Jorah and Daario are both in love with Daenerys. One reaps the rewards from that, and the other one doesn't. But D&D really just need to stop it with these complex, world-traversing tales, because it seems like what they want to make is a buddy cop comedy. There's like a dozen examples of duos that work really well, so you know what, just quit it with 3 body problem, just make your buddy cop movie already, alright? It's fine. But as praised as this season is, this is truly the season where Tyrion starts getting lobotomized, resorting to cock jokes for 80% of his dialogue. I think D&D thought this was some clever inside joke that the audience was a part of, but I don't know, to me it just didn't come across that way. This feels like something Tyrion says because he just doesn't have anything else to say. It's not even like banter back and forth. Varys even says,
I do not make dwarf jokes.
but Tyrion continues to make eunuch jokes at his expense. Varys and Selmy's presence is extremely missed in this season. The people in charge of Meereen are an injured leader of the Unsullied, what is essentially Dany's best friend and translator, a guy that she's had 3 conversations with, and a guy that she's had 0 conversations with, and as far as she's concerned, isn't on her side. We're missing the hand of the king here. We're missing Dany's true thoughts here, and I think Barristan could have served that role well. He could have continued teaching Tyrion about being a hand and somebody who advocates for Dany before they killed him off in this season. The whole point of this season is to show how incapable these people are without Dany, which, sure, fine, I get it, but it's at the expense of smart characters like Tyrion and Varys. It would have been cool for the city to be maintained until Barristan died in this season, and then show Tyrion trying to pick up the pieces, even though he didn't learn everything that he could have from Barristan about being a proper hand. And unfortunately, Dany's storyline returns to being one of the least interesting to me this season. It's filled with one-liners, like they wanted to have some sort of fan edit of her saying all these cool phrases. I'm sure like dozens of those exist out there, but her having this superpower of not burning in fire and her hair not burning off is a bit ridiculous. They give her another speech when she gets her dragon, like she didn't already have the army of the Dothraki. They just double down because, again, D&D just liked writing these speeches for Dany, but it kind of became her entire character from this point forward. By the time Tyrion and Dany reunite this season, they have had, and I kid you not, 4 interactions together. I guess that's better than Jon and Sansa's 0 at the start of the season, but it's not like Jon made Sansa hand of the king after all that either. We get this battle that seems more so just like an intro to the more important battle later in the episode. Sure, the CGI and the dragons all look great, far better than even just the last season, and at the very least, it also further improves the standing of Dany. The Iron Fleet comes off screen and makes an alliance with Dany. It serves as a pretty good ending to her time in Meereen, but also just kind of feels like D&D wanted the story to move forward at any cost. Arya starting the season off being blind is a cool low for her character to go through. Arya, with the exception of being around dead family members all the time, hasn't actually had that many lows, at least not compared to Sansa, so this is intriguing to see her go through. But the storyline doesn't get any better this season. We still don't learn more about the true purpose of the Faceless Men, or I guess I can already see the comments. We do learn that they are there to serve the god of death, but it just felt like, again, that there was some big moment or some big revelation that we were waiting for that just doesn't exist. They also kind of hint that Jaqen has taken special interest to Arya, like he has some sort of ultimate plan for her, but that ultimate plan is never explained to us, just like the High Sparrow. A lot of these storylines in these seasons have hints and clues towards something bigger, but they never actually have some big reveal to them. They have big reveals for the main characters, but that's only 50% of the battle. You need that other 50% to make this storyline both make sense and for it to be satisfying. These seasons largely miss that other 50%, the bigger reveal and larger implication on the storyline. And it does this with the River Run storyline, the King's Landing storyline, and it makes rewatching, especially this season, not very satisfying because it doesn't lead to any sort of big moments or reveals for the storylines. It just drags out until some literal big explosive finale. I do actually really like the subtle hints that the Hound is still alive and that Arya had conflicting feelings for him. This wasn't in the books. Arya and the Hound don't really have this dynamic in the books, and even where their storyline goes, I think that this is proper setup for that. Another thing I liked seeing was Arya learning about the history of everything she's missed through a play and seeing how it impacts her is one of those better moments in this entire storyline. Her laughing at Joffrey's death while everybody else boos is great. This season has great moments for Arya as a character, but it doesn't have any great moments for the House of Black and White. And maybe that's just me complaining and wanting this to be bigger because I'm a big subscriber to all those fan theories and whatnot, but it's my video, so I'm gonna keep on complaining about it. And I do overall like this plotline for Arya on paper. She goes to learn from the Faceless Men, doesn't ultimately like what they're doing, starts to reject them and prioritize herself once again. But the problem here is the storyline feels so empty, and the Faceless Men in the show are ultimately just like lame assassins for hire. They serve no higher purpose. All the theories about the Faceless Men being in charge of things like the doom of Valyria feel very hollow here. And yeah, that is me complaining about fan theories not coming true, because George writes in a way that allows fan theories to grow, and honestly for a lot of them to either be correct or to be plausible. But I think this is ultimately unsatisfying, even taking away the fan theory aspect, because Arya doesn't receive any formal training. She gets 2 jobs, fails at both of them, washes some dead bodies, gets whacked around with a stick, and supposedly this is enough training to take faces and ultimately kill the Night King. Despite the walk of shame, it's still hard to sympathize with Cersei. I don't think we're supposed to, but also this season kind of makes it feel like we're supposed to. Cersei is the most confusing character from this season onward. She's apparently the main and final villain of the series, but we're also supposed to kinda be on her side, even when she's literally on the opposite side of quite literally every other character. Jaime admits to so many wrongs to the High Sparrow, and he doesn't arrest him or anything, even when Jaime is overpowered. It makes you think that the High Sparrow has maybe some agenda that Jaime doesn't fit, but that just never happens. And this leads me to my conversation about how the whole Sparrow storyline does something incredibly rare and great, and that's make the audience wish that Joffrey was back. Joffrey would have done things to the Sparrows that I can't even explain without getting demonetized on here, and honestly, I would be all for it. Every time we go back to King's Landing this season, I find myself bored. As soon as some interesting development comes from this plotline, with Jaime and Cersei planning to overthrow the Sparrows, it goes in the other direction, and the Sparrows get more power. Marjorie has some semblance of a character arc in trying to manipulate her way out of all this, and it's almost good. But again, this isn't really leading to some big Marjorie redemption arc where she does something cool. She gets Tommen to agree to join forces with the Faith, which sure, helps her out, but also just ends up extending this horribly boring storyline. Jaime feels like a stagnant character this season. A lot of what makes him great has already been done, like letting Brienne go and him staying with Cersei feels tiring by this point. It's almost like, he wasn't with Cersei by this point in the books. This rewatch has actually made me realize that Jaime wasn't as great of a character as I thought. He has the most development out of anybody in seasons 3 and 4, and then he just kind of regresses back to his season 1 self during seasons 5, 6, and 7. Changes, yeah, for a bit, but then he regresses back again. I suppose it actually does make his character arc make more sense by the time it's all over, but it also makes the guy who was sticking up for Tyrion in front of Cersei in season 4 not really align with the character he is in this season. And this is because they didn't follow the books for Jaime. He just kind of regressed and stayed that way until the story told him he needed to do something else. Now, I mentioned this in the last video, that there is really only one season where I liked Bran's storyline, and that is this season. This is the one season that I actually love Bran as a character, at least for a little while. Something about this is the most typical fantasy, like, hero's journey stuff, it's just cool to see. Everything about Bran was building for him to finally be able to do stuff like this, and taking a season break honestly makes this stuff feel a bit more earned. He's got a new haircut, there's a new actor playing the Three-Eyed Raven, and it just makes this feel more substantial than it was before. And if I'm being honest, I haven't seen a lot of people talk about this, but I think a lot of this storyline is ripped right from the pages of The Winds of Winter. But George doesn't like writing about magic, so he never got to this point. But ultimately, I do think that like 90% of what we see on screen here is gonna happen in The Winds of Winter. I think he'll go and see flashbacks of his father and Lyanna, the Tower of Joy, the Hodor flashbacks. All of this will ultimately lead to the R+L=J confirmation, and out of all the storylines in this season, I think that mainly Bran's stuff will be like one for one with the books. The only proof I have of this is that this storyline contains the second of 3 things that George told D&D that blew their minds, and that's the Hodor reveal. So it kind of leads me to believe that the rest of this stuff also is going to happen. But what I really love, especially on a rewatch, is that Bran is actually Bran. He still has the personality of, you know, a human being. Seeing Arthur Dayne is really cool. Sure, some people are upset that he uses 2 swords, or that Dawn isn't given enough attention, but this actor had a specialty using 2 swords. It's a different sort of fight than the show ever gave us. It's a well-choreographed fight, so sure, I think using 2 swords is fine. I do think 2 things could have happened at the same time. Dawn could have been given a bigger role than it was, and we could have gotten a 2-sworded Arthur Dayne. They tried to do this a little bit. For those that don't know, Dawn is the sword of House Dayne. Think something similar to Valyrian steel, but Dawn was forged from a dying shooting star, so think Valyrian steel, but even more powerful than that. Even George has said that Dawn has magical capabilities that we're yet unaware of, and honestly, I don't even think George is aware of what they are either. The scene also introduces us to Howland Reed, and it seems that with Bran being with Mira Reed, this has to relate somewhere, right? No, it doesn't. The season also gives us the only semblance of answers when it comes to the White Walkers, how they were made by the Children of the Forest as an army to help the children, but that eventually backfired. They make these spiral patterns because it reminds them of how the Night King was born, I guess, or because it means that they're really angry and it's like a calling card. I have a lot of thoughts about this. I'm actually thinking about making another separate video about the White Walkers and just trying to put all the pieces together. Let me know if that's something you'd be interested in, or if this like 4-hour video is enough for you. There's also the fact that the Night King touches Bran, so he's, I guess, able to get into the cave, but why does the Night King want to kill the Three-Eyed Raven? What purpose does that serve? What even is the Three-Eyed Raven? I don't know. I've pointed this out before, but Mira becomes one of 4 people in this show to actually kill a White Walker here, and it does the sound once again. Now, the Hodor reveal is tragic and haunting, especially on a rewatch of the entire series, knowing what Hodor goes through. It's one of the better reveals and is definitely from the mind of George R.R. Martin, but I don't think that it's gonna happen nearly the same way as it does here. They introduce time travel in this episode and then never use it again. Also, why is there a door built into the side of this cave in the first place? Season 6, Episode 6 is about the time that Bran stops being interesting to me. We do get some cool Mad King flashbacks intercut with a bunch of stuff like the White Walkers and the Red Wedding, and it doesn't make much sense other than him learning a bunch of stuff that he didn't know, or, I don't know, just fan service stuff, which, again, is fine by me. We run into this mysterious character known as Cold Hands, at least in the book, and it's revealed to be Benjen Stark. Oh man, I'm so excited to see how major of a role he plays going forward. Now I want to talk about one of the most underrated episodes of the series, and that's Season 6, Episode 7, The Broken Man. For one, we finally get Jaime away from Cersei and start seeing him going down a more interesting path. The episode opens on the reveal that the Hound is still alive, and we see Jon going around to the Northern Lords trying to gain members for his army. The title, The Broken Man, refers to all three of these people. Jon feels like he's almost being counterproductive. The real threat is to the North, but they need to unite the North if they're going to stand a chance against the White Walkers, meaning that they have to take 2 steps backward in order to take 1 step forward. This all feels a little bit redundant to Jon, to the wildlings, to the other minor houses. He knows he's going to lose men that he'll need for the wars to come. He knows he's going up against a larger force, a force that would be much better used against the army of the dead. He's caught between wanting to do what's best for his own family, taking back Winterfell and saving Rickon, or doing what's best for the realm and trying to unite these people towards a common enemy. Even when he successfully gets people for his army, it's for a cause he knows he shouldn't ask them for. It's not enough men to make a difference, or he kinda just flat out feels like this isn't gonna work. Jaime taking command over the siege of Riverrun reminds him of his oath to Catelyn Stark. Now, seeing her home, her family, he's reminded of the days before he returned to Cersei, who he was turning into before he made it back to King's Landing. He's wondering if he's doing the right thing by still serving her. Brienne's presence serves as another big reminder to who he was and who he still can be. That also rounds out Sandor Clegane, who's been miraculously saved by this man named Brother Ray. Sandor is a man without purpose, but Brother Ray says that he's been saved for a reason, that he has a new purpose, and that it's never too late to come back, which is a great line, maybe a bit misconstrued for Sandor, because apparently coming back for him means his new purpose in life is just more violence. Ian McShane's Brother Ray takes his place among Carsey as another incredible one-episode wonder. His performance here should have won him Best Guest Actor at the Emmys. I really wish that Ian McShane could have had a bigger role, because he's, again, one of those actors who I'm completely in awe of whenever he's on screen. His conversations about not knowing which is the true God, but what truly matters is believing in what comes after, is such a breath of fresh air from all these other religious entities that we've seen in the show. He also said that Sandor Clegane is still alive for a reason, and for a long time, I thought this meant something big. Apparently, it just meant that people liked the Hound, so D&D wrote him back in. Now, at the beginning of the video, I talked about things maybe not aging that well, and unfortunately, this is kind of what I'm talking about. The spectacle of this episode is great, but I think as time has gone on, the problems of this episode have become a bit more clear. The characters involved in this battle are all stupid. Ramsay meets everybody on the fields of Winterfell because hiding behind the castle isn't his style. He knows the whole North is watching, as Davos says. Yeah, okay, fine. I'll take that. Sansa doesn't tell Jon to wait for the Knights of the Vale because she doesn't trust him, I guess? Why? She talked earlier about how she did trust him. Is it because she wants credit for this battle when and if it's won? Is it because she doesn't want Jon to know about Littlefinger, so she lets thousands of people die first instead? Even if she had told him about the Knights of the Vale and he didn't believe her because he didn't trust Littlefinger, that would have been great. That's a pretty simple and easy writing fix. But the episode needed its big reveal, which is admittedly a very cool moment. This whole decision kind of swings the pendulum the other direction for me and makes it hard to root for and to like Sansa once again. But even in the battle itself, Jon marches head-on into the army because he's angry at Ramsay. But, what is his plan here? He gets to Ramsay and kills him and then immediately dies due to the thousands of men around him. It's been said before, but this is something that has always bothered me, even the first time watching the episode, but I guess they decide to just not give 1-1 anything to fight with. A tree trunk, a spare long spear, a couple big rocks he could throw at the very least. This is your literal biggest asset in the battle, and you don't give him a weapon? It's not like 1-1 is an idiot. He used makeshift weapons at Hardhome. I don't really see a reason why they didn't do this. Even if he used like a tree trunk and it broke or something when they got surrounded, that would have been alright with me. And of course, there's the infamous moment where Rickon decides not to zigzag. Now, with all that being said, with the tactics and the decisions being stupid, this is still one of the most kick-ass episodes of television ever made. The stakes are so incredibly high and tense with the differences in the size of armies, the cinematography is a sight to behold, the music is intense and heart-pounding, the spectacle is just incredible to watch. I just got a whole new big TV and sound system. This was the episode that I turned to watch first because it's just an overall enjoyable and satisfying fight to watch. I get chills watching this every time, remembering how I felt the first time I watched it, seeing Jon go through the battlefield and how chaotic it feels. It feels like realistic to how these things would have probably gone. Sure, his plot armor is absolutely ridiculous, but seeing that Stark banner hang at the end of the episode, especially on rewatches of the show, feels so great to see. Also, I'm going to go a bit further. I'm actually going to defend this battle despite its ridiculous nature. This is a very bare bones fight. Even the Boltons and their side are still recovering from the War of the Five Kings. No one is wearing a ton of armor, everybody just kind of has what they usually have on them. And in terms of tactics, Ramsay's are actually very good. It makes a lot of sense, and it essentially works. 1-1's death goes back to what I was saying about Jon earlier. This is a very visual reminder that this entire battle is taking 1 step forward and 2 steps back. They got their home back, they've got their base of operations for the fight against the dead, but they've lost over half of their force, and the entire enemy force that could have gone to the fight for the living is now gone. I mean, I guess it's good that at least they didn't join the army of the dead, but there's no denying that all these men and 1-1 could have made a huge impact in the final fight against the dead. Jon punching Ramsay 21 times and his face still being, well, there, is the perfect encapsulation of this entire episode and fight. It's both satisfying and ridiculous, equally so. You can pick apart this fight as much as you want, the tactics, the plot armor, the actual armor and lack thereof, the dumb decision making, but I still love it. I'll always love it because it's fun and it makes the entire Northern storyline for the past 4 seasons all worth it. Nothing screams Season 6 louder than this opening scene. D&D said, let's get all of the people that we don't know what to do with or just don't want to be around anymore, put them in a room together, and blow it up. We get what might be Ramin Djawadi's masterpiece when it comes to this show, and that is saying something, and that's Light of the Seven. This song perfectly encapsulates the tense and mysterious nature of the scene. Things continue to build, the atmosphere feels off, until we finally see what the plan truly is, and just how far Cersei is willing to go in order to win. This is an incredibly exciting scene, but upon a rewatch, I don't think it makes up for 2 seasons of the Sparrow storyline. For all of this build-up, for all the questions around the High Sparrow and what his true intentions are, to end it in a literal blaze of glory feels a little lazy. Incredibly pretty, tense, exciting, and chaotic, but still ultimately a little lazy. This episode has a lot of exciting moments, Arya killing Walder Frey and enjoying it, signaling that she's going down a much darker path, Dany naming Tyrion Hand of the King because he's done so much good in Meereen and deserves it. We learn that Littlefinger wants to be on the Iron Throne with Sansa, which, Sure, Jaime returns to King's Landing and sees what Cersei's done to the place, giving us a look that promises he's finally done with her. Right? And of course, the long-awaited reveal of R plus L equals J. This comes from a storyline with Bran, who, oddly enough, still has a personality. Having this monumental reveal come in the episode titled The Winds of Winter is kind of like the ultimate FU to George. Now, I talked about it, George deserves his fair share of blame for this series, but this had to have been so incredibly deflating for him creatively. He spent 20 years crafting this mystery, using it as judgment whether D&D deserved to adapt the show in the first place, and the answer is ripped out from under him and told in the show, in the episode named after the book he didn't finish. This entire season is definitely a bit of wish fulfillment. It marked the change between what the show was and what it would become. It marked the end of the books and where D&D would officially take over. And similarly to season 3, I think that they actually wanted to tell the story of this season. I think that they wanted to show us the Battle of the Bastards and the Hodor reveal and all these exciting moments. While the writing isn't nearly as good as it was the first 4 seasons, while there were no books to adapt, there's no denying that this is an incredibly exciting season of television, and for that reason, I'm giving season 6 a 9.2 out of 10. So I'm gonna say it again, but I remember all the leaks. I remember the entire atmosphere around when this season was coming out. I remember all the interviews, the videos picking apart the trailer, the leaked photos, and I kind of want to address that once again. Similar to how Kit Harington lied about his return in season 6, he also went on to lie in interviews during this season.
How many fake scenes were you personally involved in?
3.
3.
3 fake scenes.
3 fake scenes. How many hours did those fake scenes take to shoot?
About 5 hours each.
Really?
Yeah.
What a pain in the ass. Really?
By saying that they filmed fake scenes, so that way when all the leaked photos came out, they were like, oh no, Jon and Daenerys, they didn't actually meet. That was just a fake scene that we filmed. First of all, this doesn't happen. I, again, almost thought about making an entirely separate video about not listening to what actors say in interviews or anything like that. But as somebody who went to film school, as somebody who has worked on sets before, as somebody who knows a lot of people working on sets currently, the film industry is ruled by one thing and one thing only. It's the same as every other industry, and that's money. A production, no matter how big or small, would never waste time and money to film fake scenes. Anyone who believed that or says otherwise just doesn't really know how things work in the film industry, which might sound harsh, but that's true. Imagine going into work at a Burger King or something, and the manager tells you, oh, so you're gonna be constantly making burgers all day today. We're gonna have no customers, but yeah, you just have to keep on working, so that way we can make it seem like we're busy. No workers would do that, the same way, especially actors, the most pampered people on the planet, would never come into work someday to film some fake scene. So that whole interview was a lie. And if there's, I guess, one thing you take away from this video, don't listen to anything actors say in interviews, or don't listen to them if they're like, oh, I'm not gonna be in it, which again seems obvious. But, also most of the stories that they tell on interviews are fake anyway, but that's besides the point. But anyways, I think that the season actually does a lot of stuff right, especially given their own time constraints. Do I wish that there was more time? Yes. Do I wish that it was paced the same way as the seasons before this? Yes, absolutely. But I actually think that they did a good job with the time that they allotted themselves. And I say it that way because HBO was basically at this point giving David and Dan a blank check, and they were like, no, we're gonna only do 7 episodes for this season, which, who knows, but I know this season rushes things, but again, I'm just looking for positives here. Starting off with a bit of a smaller storyline, Sam at the Citadel is pretty great. It does a good job at showing time passing, while also having a goal, and that's to get into the restricted section of the library. When I first watched this, I thought that if this is what it meant to have less episodes, then maybe this could work. This is kind of what I wanted out of the Arya and Bravo storyline. Sure, everything happens fast, but the Citadel seems to earn its reputation in what little we see of it. The House of Black and White didn't. I also just completely forgot that Jim Broadbent was even in this show, and I think it's funny because he's kind of just playing Professor Slughorn, but like an adjacent version of the character. Yet another character with wasted potential in a storyline that kind of goes nowhere. Sam finding out that there's dragon glass on Dragonstone, imagine that, is actually a pretty great inciting incident for the plot this season. It gives Jon a huge reason to go there, other than just Dany and the dragons being there already. But then we also find out that Jorah is here waiting to get cured of grayscale. It's treated like it's a long shot at survival and there's essentially no cure, so I was waiting to see what Sam could come up with to have him survive, but Sam just being able to cut off the area and apply some lotion to it seems ridiculous. It was talked about like it was this giant procedure that no maester alive could do. Does this speak to Sam's abilities, to Jorah's willpower? I'm gonna assume it's a combination of the two, but just like a lot of things in this season, the makeup, the performance, the camera work, all of this is incredible. The fact that his explanation is just...
I read the book and followed the instructions.
is basically like the maester being amazed that Sam could build a Lego with instructions to it. Starting off hot here, I'm gonna talk about the infamous cameo from Ed Sheeran. A lot of people point to this exact moment as the show's complete downfall. It makes no sense for him to be here, it's very jarring, but other than that, I actually do think this is a good scene. We're trained to think of the Lannister soldiers and just soldiers in general in this show as bad people. She surveys them and where their weapons are, but it turns out they really are just nice and good people. It reminds me of the Stark soldiers that Brienne came across in Season 2 and how they weren't very good people. Soldiers in the war don't always support who's in charge, and that's exactly what this scene shows. I just wish it had continued showing this as a major theme of the series. But after this, we get a series of fan servicey moments, which aren't bad, but also kind of lead nowhere. She sees Hot Pie, and he tells her about how Jon won the Battle of the Bastards and has control of Winterfell, causing her to change course and go north instead of south, which is a cool development for her character. Her seeing Nymeria is also pretty cool. But again, it's ultimately just a fan service moment because this never comes back into play. It could have, and it should have, and it almost did, but I'll get to that later. Her saying, "That's not you," is such a strange and misleading thing to say. In the behind the scenes of the episode, D&D say it's a callback to Season 1 where Arya says, "That's not me," to her father, but like, who could possibly be thinking about that exact moment? It's such a random callback. Even the most hardcore of fans like myself, at the time, were left pretty confused. Is she saying that that isn't Nymeria? That's kind of what it seems like she's saying. But Arya, of course, goes on to join this storyline, so let's talk about Bran has no personality anymore. Whatever happened between the end of last season and now, whatever it is in universe, whatever it is by the writers, whatever it is, it was a horrible change. And I don't even really understand it, because the Brynden Rivers three-eyed raven still had emotions. Ed asks how he knows it can truly be Brandon Stark, like he's asking for proof, and he says that Ed saw the army of the dead, so he lets him by. But that didn't answer his question. He still doesn't know if this is actually Bran Stark or not. The differences between Jon and Sansa and their leadership style is a very interesting storyline. While things were bad, sure, they were happy to see each other, but now that things are at a relative time of calm, they're still the same siblings that didn't get along when they were children. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I actually wish we could have seen more of this. Last season, there was this huge cliffhanger with Littlefinger inserting himself between Jon and Sansa, getting Sansa to second guess herself over Jon's leadership and how she might want to be in charge. We see one scene of them addressing this issue, and then, I don't know, things are just good between them. And after this, Jon's character is basically swapped out with Arya, so that way the sisters can have some strife between them. There are some lighthearted moments that I enjoy, and I actually think make sense in the show, like Tormund being obsessed with Brienne. I think that's hilarious and very in line with his character. It adds some levity, and I think it works. A lot of the reunions in this season also come with some lighthearted moments, and I think it's all pretty well done. But I remember the first time I watched this season, the character I was most intrigued by was the Hound. I felt pairing him with Beric and having them talk about the Lord of Light, him seeing some vision in the fire, facing his past by visiting the house of the father and child that he and Arya came across and burying them, all of this had to mean something. I really felt like all of this had to amount to more than him just being this fan favorite character, and at this point in the show, Sandor Clegane was my pick for who would end up being Azor Ahai, but I'll elaborate on that further on. Even if Bran was the three-eyed raven, it would have been cool to see him even pretend to be Bran Stark at the same time. My mind goes to the Helena and Severance. I won't really post any spoiler pictures here, but it would be cool if Bran kind of did the same thing. Him and Sansa's reunion is all around lame. Arya and Sansa's reunion is a bit better, but still lame. And I absolutely hate the whole Arya versus Sansa plotline. I didn't believe it was real for a second. I knew it was just leading to some twist. It felt incredibly forced. I'm still not even sure, even on rewatch, if this was like a plan that they came up with to make Littlefinger think his plan is working, or if they were actually feuding with each other and Arya was threatening Sansa's life. Both Sansa and Arya lose any and all intrigue they had to them with this storyline. Now I think I remember why I found Sansa annoying in the first place, because they came up with this nothing burger of a plotline for her this season. This is easily the worst plotline of the season. I guess it breaks the streak of the North being the best plotline for the past 2 seasons, but in a way that is just god-awful. We see that Arya is also some incredibly skilled fighter, and I just don't even know how that is. Like I said, she went on 2 missions for the Faceless Men, failed both of them, trained a bit in acrobatics, but only using a staff. It just doesn't make sense. Did this water dancing really teach her how to beat Brienne in a fight? Dragonstone gets a new and improved look, and it definitely needed it. I think when Stannis was here, we literally only ever saw, like, the war room, the beach, and the dungeons. So the end of the first episode gives us this literal 5-minute sequence for the audience to essentially get a tour of the place. It's a huge moment. Dany is in Westeros, but the scene is so long and there's no dialogue until the final moment of the episode. I remember even thinking when this premiered, we only get 7 episodes this season, and Dany and her entire crew get a combined 1 line of dialogue in the entire first episode. It just felt a bit odd to me. How are they gonna tell a compelling story long enough and earned enough with just 7 episodes when they pull off stuff like this? I don't know though, I guess we'll find out. But Dragonstone looks great. I like that it's kept the same way in House of the Dragon Season 1, and it's not like the Eyrie that literally changes every time we see it. There are a lot of things like Tyrion and Jon reuniting that are incredibly heartwarming. I like these moments. I'm intrigued to see how they play out in the books, because a lot of them are, like I said, heartwarming, or just overall exciting to see. If the books play out like the show, then we are gonna see a lot of reunions, but this specific one with Tyrion and Jon in the show is well done. But then we get perhaps the biggest meeting of the entire show between Jon and Daenerys. At face value, without taking into account the theories or anything, this is very clearly the song of ice and fire that the books are talking about. This conversation doesn't really go the way we want it to, and for that reason, it's great. John and Dany are both staunch and arrogant for their own claims. I think the majority of the audience probably sides with John here because he's here for two reasons: to get allies and to get the dragon glass. Dany is just kind of inviting him here to maybe get allies. That's it. And with her being obsessed with getting him to bend the knee, makes her a bit aggravating in the eyes of the audience. It's not her fault she doesn't know the threat of the North, but again, it puts the audience in the shoes of John, wanting us to root for him over Dany, which goes back to what I was saying earlier. D&D very clearly wanted to make John the main character over Daenerys. I do like this shot of John and Dany in one. It emphasizes that these two are the main characters, how strange it is to see them in one frame, and I think that's just really cool. But over the course of the season, their stubbornness, both of them, become aggravating. John really should have just said, sure, I'll bend the knee if you agree to help us first, and that would have been great. I just don't understand this season's conflict of him not bending the knee. Tyrion says it takes no time, and honestly, this might be the smartest thing that he says in all of seasons 5 to 8. John doesn't want to be king. He didn't even want to be king in the North. What difference does it make if he pledges for this queen, the Dragon Queen, who's going to help him out in his war first anyways? However aggravating they both might be, each and every conversation they have from here on out becomes incredibly important. Because at all times, we're supposed to believe they're becoming allies, friends, and lovers. And that is a lot to ask out of a few conversations across 4 episodes. There's also a weird amount of emphasis on Dany not being able to have kids in this season. The same amount as John being a bastard and not a Stark. Now, one of these leads somewhere, and the other doesn't, which I just can't help but think this was also meant to lead somewhere. Now, I'm going to do something here that I don't think anybody has ever done before, and that's give Euron Greyjoy a compliment. I actually think that Pilau Asbæk is a great actor, and he plays this version of the character well. Yes, his writing is terrible. He's a cartoonishly evil character, but he's doing everything that he's being written and directed to do. And I don't think that he's miscast at all. I actually do think he could have portrayed a book-accurate Euron. He just wasn't asked to do that. Also, it's official. I am over Jaime Lannister. He stayed with Cersei for 4 seasons, 3 additional seasons than he stayed with her in the books. Jaime has spent these 3 seasons either not with Cersei but doing her bidding, with her and doing her bidding, or doubting his allegiance to her but still staying with her. Him still supporting her after blowing up the Sept is just ridiculous. He should have been angry with her during season 5 and 6, and then been done and on his own in this season, and that's like at the very most. He should have been done with her back in like season 4, but whatever. Jaime is quite literally the last dangling thread of a character that people like in this storyline this season, and D&D had to hold on to that for as long as they possibly could. The only reason Jaime is here is to give us even an ounce of sympathy towards Cersei's cause. Cersei giving that last sand snake a poison kiss just for her mom to watch her die is such a great and tragic scene. Man, I can't wait to see how this continues on and gives Ilaria a more important character arc going forward. You know what, actually I hated this whole storyline, so I'm fine with this being the end. This shows us Cersei being evil and too far gone, and I think that's perfectly fine. Also, this was the scene I was talking about earlier that makes the season 5 Dorne storyline actually make a little bit of sense, but that's it. Perhaps the most unfortunate thing about this storyline is how, despite Lena Headey doing everything she can, Cersei is such a dull character now. And at the end of the day, that might be this season's and next season's biggest offense. But the central storyline of this season is this new war. This season wraps up an old war and plunges us into a new one. It is very fast, but I actually think the overarching war storyline this season is pretty well done. While a lot of the reasoning for certain moves doesn't work, I think the chessboard that Cersei and Dany are using makes for some interesting moves and exciting moments. But because of this is also Tyrion's far and away worst season in the show. With how flat out dumb he is in this season, I've never been more Team Daenerys and what she ends up actually doing. The season opens off on a bright note, with Arya taking revenge on the Freys, a nice, cool, badass moment. But here's the thing, and this show continues doing this time and time again, this wasn't meant to be some badass girl power moment. This would have been great if it was a double-edged sword, if Arya was becoming this darker and more out-of-control person, but that's not what happens. This is just meant to be a cool, kick-ass moment. We root for Arya here, there's no repercussions for it, and it's literally never touched on again. At the beginning of this season, Dany has her entire army. The Tyrell army, the Dorne army, the Ironborn, and Yara even tells her that she should just take King's Landing and it would fall within the day. Dany says she doesn't want to do that because she doesn't want to be Queen of the Ashes. Yikes. I truly wonder, in what alternate universe out there, what would have happened if she did just take the city right away. Tyrion is the one who comes up with the brilliant idea of where to bring the armies and what they're gonna do. Because, Tyrion is the natural military strategist, and he has been this entire time. Not Grey Worm, not Quono, or whatever his name is, not even Dany, but Tyrion does this, and very quickly, all goes to hell. The Ironborn and Dorne are taken out almost as soon as they leave Dragonstone by Euron, who, at the very least, takes care of the Sand Snakes, which were about 2 seasons overstaying their welcome. Dany taking Casterly Rock just for Cersei and Jaime to take Highgarden is a great development in this war. And having it happen montage style with Tyrion talking reminds me of the Samwell montage in the first episode. It's a great development, it's a cool thing to see unfold, and it makes sense. While it seems like a win for Dany, it's actually a win for Cersei. This is one of those moments where I think that the time skips and the lowered episode count actually works, but the issue with this going forward is that it isn't just action or travel that becomes allotted for this time skip montage, it also eventually becomes character development. That being said, I do like Dany taking it upon herself to go and attack Westeros. This, of course, leads us to the spoils of war. Like Battle of the Bastards before it, this is an insanely entertaining battle to watch. One of the things I have to give it credit for is giving us 2 sides to root for. We spend a lot of this battle through the point of view of Bronn and Jaime, 2 characters that we care for, but also Dany in the sky. We care about Dany and of course the dragon, so seeing the Scorpion come out is very conflicting. This is actually the only other battle, other than Blackwater, that does this, and it almost makes up for Jaime still being with Cersei. The plot armor is massive, there's still some logical issues like Dany burning all of the loot when they just talked about what they need for her army, and it's a lot of the stuff that's in those carriages, but whatever. Overall, I was surprised by how much I enjoyed this battle on rewatch. Small things like seeing the Lannister men shake with fear at the charging Dothraki, a callback to what Robert Baratheon said about them back in season 1, was really cool. This is entertaining, very pretty to look at. Honestly, I think I might have liked it more on this rewatch than I did even back when it first came out. It's unexpected, being in episode 4, the same way that Hardhome was unexpected. It's It's well choreographed and shot, giving Bronn the Jon Snow oneer going through the battlefield, especially considering that Bronn doesn't die and he really should have, is surprising, but again, it's well shot. What does Bronn really stand to gain from surviving this? Him choosing to save Jaime and dying over getting his gold would have been a really great character arc for him. Tyrion being forced to watch this happen is also really great. His tactics and battle plans have sucked so far, and this is the only thing that's gone right for them this season, so yeah, he should just stand there and watch, being scared for his friend and brother. Jaime charging at Dany, knowing his life is basically over, is really intense and it's a powerful moment, but the thing that knocks this moment and this entire battle is that nothing really comes out of this. No one dies, Bronn isn't burned out of commission. I mean, I guess the Tarleys are killed, but that ultimately doesn't mean a damn thing either. I actually kind of wish that they still had Heartsbane, so Dany would then give it to Jon to show their friendship and relationship growing that much more. D&D point to this specific moment as the reason for Dany's turn into the Mad Queen, but I fail to see Dany's decision to kill the Tarleys as evidence of her being evil. I don't see how her not listening to Tyrion's advice is evidence of her being evil. She listened to Tyrion's advice this entire season, and it led to half her army and alliances being wiped out. I'm actually totally in line with her decision to kill the Tarleys here. I think this was great to see on her part, and like I said, I've never been more Team Dany than I was during this rewatch. Jaime returning to King's Landing from the Reach, still in his dirtied armor, is part of the problem with the time traveling this season. Even if he rode through the night, he still wouldn't have gotten back to King's Landing. Did he just sleep in all of his gear? Even if he just didn't have the armor on but was still dirty, it would have been fine. But this kind of stuff makes it seem like they were attacked like just outside the walls of King's Landing, and that's just not where they were. The episode Eastwatch is far and away the most ridiculous when it comes to time traveling. This episode plays out like a highlight reel of episodes to come, almost like this is an extended next time on Game of Thrones type of montage. Gendry returning to the story is cool. The meta joke about rowing actually pisses me off far more than the Ed Sheeran cameo. I really feel like there's 3 episodes worth of content in this episode alone. We're missing a lot of the travel moments, a lot of the small character building moments. Honestly, a few smaller scenes between Jon and Dany, Tyrion and Davos, Jon and Gendry, who could have been an incredibly exciting duo. Even seeing more of the Hound and the Brotherhood traveling all could have made up 3 episodes worth of screen time. But, I don't know, am I really asking for this? It's not like the writing is as strong or captivating as it was back in seasons past, where every scene was as good as the next one, so maybe seeing all of this rapid fire is ultimately for the best. Now, if Battle of the Bastards didn't age well in my mind, then Beyond the Wall might as well be an episode of All's Fair. This might actually be the dumbest episode in all of Game of Thrones. And yes, that's including Season 8. The plan is to go beyond the wall, capture a white, then bring it to Cersei, a notoriously reasonable and honorable person, in the hopes that she will agree to a ceasefire and send her army up north. This was always a long shot of a plan. Everybody has talked extensively about how dumb of a plan this is, to send the King of the North to not have horses, to not have adequate weapons, everything. The show wanted to have the Avengers on a journey north. Sure, you know what? I get it. First time watching this, I thought this was cool as hell. Seeing all these characters together, either reunited or meeting for the first time, it brings a lot of great moments and a lot of great conversations. So, if you want to do this, craft a story to go along with that, instead of having this be another stupid Tyrion plan. Let's see here. Sam finds out at the Citadel that the famed Horn of Winter is beyond the wall, and the White Walkers can use it to bring down the wall, so they have to assemble the Avengers to go and get it. Where is it located? How about at that rock that the Hound had a vision of? And then afterwards, more or less, the same exact thing could happen. Does that introduce a MacGuffin? Yes, it does. Does George actively avoid writing that? Yes, he does, but also Valyrian Steel and Dragonglass are also MacGuffins, so whatever. But like I said, this episode brings a lot of really great interactions, whether they be emotional, funny, important, or just all around intriguing. I think a lot of these are really well done, and it is overall just cool to see people like Jon and Jorah or Tormund and the Hound interacting together. Jon and Beric have a conversation that's essentially just, we're here to kill the dead, and that's all we need to understand. And it basically acts as a fourth wall break to the audience once the show is over with. The dead are evil, and that is all you need to know. To hear D&D talk about how they wanted to do a zombie polar bear for so long but didn't have the budget just kind of proves where their mind was and how it was in the wrong place. This scene, the zombie polar bear, yeah, it's cool, but stuff like this is cooler when there's a plot-relevant reason for it. I remember on first watch, I liked this fight on the lake, but now that I saw it again, I think that this is the dumbest fight in the series. Yes, even above that one. Let's be generous here and say that the gang stays here for a week for the water to freeze. You know what would have been cool? Some more conversations here, talking about how they might die, what they wanted to do, some truths, something that bonds them closer together during that fight. Even a line of dialogue or something about how they're now out of food because it's been so long. That would have been great, and let's just say that the tactics here make sense. The Night King only sends a few whites at a time as to not break the ice, allowing them to fight them off. Yeah, that works, but by the end of the fight, this is completely abandoned. All the whites are just charging at them anyways. Yes, seeing dragons in the north, fighting the White Walkers and the whites is a cool thing to see. Seeing Beric ignite his lightsaber is cool. Seeing characters like Jorah and the Hound fight the army of the dead, I don't know, like I just would have never pictured them doing that. This feels like what the story was always ultimately leading to, and it looks great. Seeing a dragon die here is the ultimate gut punch, but at the very least, it raises the stakes. Just for those stakes to seem like a joke when Jon is tackled into the lake, somehow survives, and makes it back. Benjen showing up here is the icing on this shit cake. He served absolutely no purpose in the entire show other than being a deus ex machina to save the Stark kids. I also like to think that Jon here thinks that seeing Benjen was some fever dream. He probably was so delirious that he thinks he hallucinated Benjen and just found a horse out there. I wish that this was some kind of conversation he had with somebody later on. Maybe if there were 10 episodes, we would have gotten something like that. Tormund absolutely should have died here. It made for a really cool and like big relief the first time I saw this and he didn't die, but somebody other than Benjen Stark, the dragon, and a bunch of red shirts, somebody else needed to die. Even if Beric had to give his kiss of life to Jon to wake him up again, I think that would have been cool. A throwback problem I remember people having with this episode is when the Army of the Dead just grabbed the dragon out with these chains, and everybody was like, where did all these chains come from? It's so funny to me now that of all the issues this episode has, that's what people were concerned about. This is like the least unrealistic thing to me. Where did they get the chains from? I don't know, Hardhome. They had ships with anchors at Hardhome. How about that? That's where they got the chains. There's so much to complain about with this episode, but I remember that being a really big one for some reason. In the finale, again, we get some cool reunions, Brienne and the Hound, Tyrion and Podrick, we get some cool new places like the Dragon Pit, and new meetings like Cersei and Dany. This whole situation is tense, and you can just feel that something is gonna go wrong, somebody's gonna die, someone's gonna betray someone else. Oh boy, I can't wait.
And here we go. I hope you're hungry for nothing.
This is the only time in the entire series where all major characters are together and nothing of importance happens. Quite literally, you could cut this entire sequence out, keep everybody in the North, and nothing changes. Sure, you miss out on some reunions and stuff, but that's secondary to the plot. This episode illustrates quite well how great D&D were with character interactions, for the most part, but how terrible they were with coming up with the plot. Sure, there's a bit of misdirection with the white maybe not being in the crate, but when it is in there, it just feels a bit manipulative and forced to add a bit more tension. It's not even good misdirection, because nothing happened to it. The story is just kind of framed like it's possibly not in there. There also seems to be another attempt to humanize Cersei when she meets with Tyrion. I don't think anything like this will ever happen in the books. Family, above all, seems to be a theme in this later half of the show, and they try to convey that here, but it almost makes Cersei seem weak. And for the same thing to happen with Jaime later in the same episode, it makes Cersei seem incredibly weak. Lena Headey could have honestly, Cersei could have been the final boss of the show. Lena Headey has the capabilities of making Cersei this formidable threat, but they just didn't write her that way. And to top this season off with another Tyrion blunder, saying that, oh yeah, Cersei's definitely going to send her army up north, just makes sense. He literally doesn't have a single win or good thing to say in this entire season. I really hate that Littlefinger gets caught in this lie. I honestly wish that, Littlefinger would try to escape or something, and that he would be randomly killed by robbers on the road or something. It would show that all of his scheming and plotting doesn't matter if the world he's trying to build is already corrupt. He goes out like a literal weenie and just kind of seems like he was never that big of a deal to begin with. Mind you, he is literally the reason for the entire start of this story and the War of the Five Kings. Just feels like a loose end that D&D thought this was the easiest way to get rid of him. Jaime finally decides to leave Cersei, and again, when it first happened, when I first saw this, I was like, oh, thank God. But watching it again, it almost feels too little too late. His character is almost too far gone to come back, but who knows? I guess we'll see if Season 8 changes that. Something I was really surprised about watching this again is that I actually did believe Jon and Dany's love story. Like I said earlier, every interaction they had was incredibly important, but I think they did everything they could to make this believable in the time they gave themselves. A lot of that comes down to Kit Harington and Emilia Clarke, so kudos to them, and they once again set up that Dany could possibly end up being pregnant. I can't wait to see where that one goes. The season ends on a genuinely phenomenal cliffhanger, but I love how the dragon's fire is now blue for no reason other than the fact that it looks cool. I don't think there's anything particularly offensive about this season. There's a lot of dumb moments, Tyrion's scheming, the writing for Cersei, the march beyond the wall, the time traveling, but it can and does get much worse. I'm going to give Season 7 a 7.8 out of 10. So here we go. This was actually the season that I was the most excited to watch again. I had seen every other season of this show, even Season 7. I watched that like 2 or 3 times before Season 8 premiered. But since that final episode, The Iron Throne, came out in 2019, I have not watched Season 8 again. Maybe it would be better than I imagined. Maybe because I was excited to watch it again, maybe because my expectations were lowered, I would have a better time. Back when this first episode premiered, I literally remember just sitting there all day long, just waiting for that episode. I was completely head over heels obsessed with this show. I was more excited for Season 8 of Game of Thrones than I was for maybe any other piece of media ever. And I was surprised by a number of things in this season that I actually did like. This season isn't entirely hateable. At least the first half of it isn't. So I'm gonna get some general thoughts out of the way before I go into things, and with this season, I'm just gonna take it episode by episode instead of storyline by storyline. There's only 6 episodes, so there we go. First off, I completely forgot about this new opening title sequence. Why do this? Because there weren't enough locations to fill out the entire theme song? I don't even really think that's true, but I guess so. That's the only thing that makes sense, and I don't know. This opening is cool. It does feel a bit weird. The animation also seems entirely different, but whatever. I think the most offensive part of this season are the characters themselves. I kind of just see all these characters now as caricatures of themselves. They're all like Kevin from season 9 of The Office. And this isn't just a Game of Thrones issue. A lot of shows do this. These once fully formed characters who would make different decisions based on their journeys would sometimes surprise people, but now at this point in the show, in a final season of stuff, everybody kind of knows like what a character would and would not do. So the first half of this season kind of plays everything very safe, and then there are some interesting decisions made, some of it a bit fan servicey, and other times just to try and subvert audience expectations. The whole nod in comparison to Danny arriving to Winterfell with Robert and how he arrived in season 1 is really clever and honestly a great way to start the season off. Arya still being the point of view character watching these people arrive is a full circle moment and shows us just how much her character has changed from this moment to this moment, especially when she sees a lot of people that she now knows being on this journey to Winterfell. The first line of dialogue being a Tyrion to Varys cock joke kind of threw me off even on the first time I watched it. I was like, really? That's the opening line? Consider my expectations subverted. Sansa bringing up how they're gonna feed this army is one of those things that only Game of Thrones would bring up, and it's a great question. All these little moments made this show as great as it is, or was, because this is used for another power moment for Daenerys, and it's never elaborated on further. A subplot about how they would get enough food to feed this army might sound boring, but it also could have led to some really great character moments and additional plot lines. But this entire episode and season is all about condensing things even further. A huge part of this episode is all about reunions. Jon and Bran, Sansa and Tyrion, Jon and Arya, Arya and Gendry, Arya and the Hound, even some meetings or short-lived reunions like Jon and Sansa, Dany and Sam, Jon and Sam, and some of these are good and heartwarming, but they also don't really carry as much weight as are, I feel like, needed, and they feel a bit silly. Lena Headey is still giving a masterful performance. Of all the legacy awards this season got at the Emmys, they really couldn't throw one her way for all these years of such great work as this character. I also don't understand why they built up these elephants that the Golden Company was going to bring over just for them to make it a moment for laughs.
I wanted those elephants.
By the time we get to episode 5, it just seems like Dany is gonna steamroll Cersei. It doesn't seem like it's gonna be a fight, and it's not. But you're telling me that they couldn't get the budget for elephants this season? They had mammoths back in season 4, why not get elephants? Oh, right, sorry. Subverted expectations and condensing the story. I also just completely forgot that Bronn was even in this season. Him going against Tyrion and Jaime is one of the most underrated, dumbest moments of this season and series. Him not choosing to be on their side and have a full character arc by fighting in the Long Night is so incredibly dumb. He should have died in the loot train battle in season 7. There was no place for him in this season, and it just feels like wasted time that could have been utilized elsewhere. Yara talking about a place Dany could retreat to if they can't hold Winterfell really made me think that they weren't gonna win this initial fight. I remember all the fake leaks about this season were all about how the army was gonna have to continue retreating south, and I totally believed it. I felt like episode 3 would have been the Infinity War, and then episode 5 would have been Endgame, and I think that's an appropriate comparison considering Endgame and The Long Night premiered in the same weekend. Tough weekend for the Starks. Jon finally riding a dragon being a moment that's more or less played up for laughs is also completely ridiculous. But this was maybe the best way to show it and introduce this concept without it being this last-minute addition to the story. This was a huge issue with the season only being 6 episodes. And also, I don't even think Jon needed to ride a dragon at all with the way this season plays out. He doesn't do anything on it in The Long Night, he's not riding it when Rhaegal dies, it's just another wish fulfillment plotline. I'm unsure of why Sam is so upset about his father dying. He literally starts crying on the spot, and sure, it seems like he's more upset about maybe his brother dying, but it almost seems like he learns that his sweet mother and sister died here, and he's holding back his true emotions. But Sam, I don't know, I feel like he's supposed to be stronger than this now. He's gone through so much as a character, and over the past couple seasons, it just feels like another way to bring the characters against Dany. So I know that this season is filled with memes about Kit Harington's lines and how ridiculous they are, and he only says 1 or 2 things, but I'll also say this is the first season that Kit actually impressed me as an actor. He's been fine before this, good and great even, but I do think he turned it up another level in this season, and that's across all episodes. I've seen him in a few projects since then, and I stand by it. I think that he is a great actor, and I think it makes sense that he got an Emmy nomination for Best Lead Actor for this season. Same goes with Emilia Clarke, but I'll talk about her when I talk about the finale. Now, I've always felt that this was an underrated episode of the show. I made a video about this episode a long time ago that I think I've since privated it for some reason, but it was about how underrated this episode is. I don't know, if you want to watch it, let me know, I'll make it public again. I gotta give D&D huge props for writing this episode, because they didn't write this episode. In fact, it's the only episode of the season that they didn't write. An episode like this truly encapsulates the spirit of the show. The quiet moments before a big battle, the more human and emotional moments in a fantasy world. But an episode like this also doesn't really belong in a season where there's only 6 episodes. I remember even when this episode ended, I was like, wow, there's only 4 episodes left in the entire series. And with the next episode being a big battle, that left 3 episodes to tell the entire remainder of the story, the entire 3rd act of the story. I didn't know how they were going to pull it off, but, you know, I was excited to see how it was done. I remember they didn't release the names of the episodes until after they came out, and I genuinely thought that this episode was going to be called Jamie. And it honestly still kind of is, but with a double meaning. But this episode is literally all about the character development of Jaime Lannister. He's back in the place where he made the biggest regret of his life. He's making reparations for that, making amends with Bran, Tyrion, Brienne, and just overall, once again, forsaking his own vows to do what he believes is right, a core value and characteristic of his character. I honestly don't understand why Sansa doesn't like Daenerys. Sure, there's the background, there's the history, but there's bigger problems to face right now. Maybe this is Sansa not truly believing them, or not truly believing in Jon, and I'll get to that later, but this is actually, I don't say this lightly, it kind of feels like drama for the sake of it, and pitting 2 women against each other for the sake of drama. Sure, this could be 2 strong women against each other, but this conflict doesn't really amount to anything. There is no Army of the North versus Army of Daenerys, so this kind of just feels like a red herring, which again, in a season of 6 episodes, feels like wasted time. Tormund arriving and saying that the dead will be here before the sun comes up tomorrow is a really dread-inducing line. This episode does an absolutely phenomenal job at setting up this battle. What the people do in the eve of their presumed deaths, their last wishes, and their last actions. In a lot of ways, this is the most human episode of all of Game of Thrones. In some ways, I'd even say that this episode is the heart of the entire series, and I truly do believe that there will be a moment or a series of chapters that are similar to this episode in George's final book. Maybe he had a falling out with D&D, but maybe he didn't have a falling out with my ex-girlfriend's dad, so he told him some more tidbits than he told David and Dan. If this episode is the heart of the series, then the heart of this episode comes from this singular room filled with what is essentially a bunch of side characters who have absolutely no business in Winterfell. Jon and Dany take a back seat in this episode, which again doesn't make a ton of sense in a season of 6 episodes, but in this room we see what are the final moments, the final character arcs of many people we've come to know and love. Tyrion, Jaime, Tormund, Podrick, Davos, and Brienne. All mostly side characters we've known to come and love, a lot of them fan favorites, a lot of them reuniting or meeting for the first time. I believe everyone in this room should have died in the upcoming battle. Maybe except for Tyrion, but the reality is none of them died in the upcoming battle. Jaime knights Brienne, and we get what I believe is the first actual smile from her in this series, and these are the heartwarming moments we wanted to see, that the audience deserves to see, right before our hearts get ripped from our chest during the battle, except that doesn't really happen. I gotta say, with how big my expectations were for him, the Hound and Rory McCann just feel a little off this season. I don't know if he was maybe more checked out than everybody else, if he didn't like his character arc, whatever it may be. I feel like all of his lines are cheesy and just really weirdly delivered. Similarly, I think that Maisie Williams, when shit hits the fan for Arya, it's great and she gives a great performance, but when she's just kind of hanging around, I don't believe that she's become this ruthless and emotionless person. I do like that she gets a staff for the battle because that's the only thing we ever seen her train with the Faceless Men. But overall, some of the characters and some of the performances just feel a bit strange to me. Now here's where I'm going to give my probably supremely unpopular opinion, but I think it would have been cool if Jon gave Longclaw to Jorah and Sam gave Jon Heartsbane. Heartsbane is the coolest looking sword. I'll die on this hill. Fight me in the comments. I dare you. If this video gets to 5,000 likes in 1 week, I will even buy Heartsbane. Podrick singing as everybody around gets ready for the battle is, and I say this in all sincerity, a top 5 moment of the series. Sansa and Theon having one last meal together, Grey Worm leaving to join the front lines and saying goodbye to Missandei. All of this is incredibly emotional and makes you fear what's coming next. This is a phenomenal episode of the series. This absolutely gets shafted because of what comes after, but if what came after was good, then I think that this episode absolutely gets like a 9 or above rating.
Think that killing those guys is funny?
I do. And I'm tired of pretending it's not.
So, let's talk about it. In some ways, I feel like my entire YouTube journey has led me to this moment, led me to talking about this episode. The single most frustrating, overhyped, dark episode in all of television, The Long Night. That lasted as long as every other night that has ever happened. I remember everything about the build up to this episode. I remember going to see Avengers Endgame on Friday and still being more excited for this episode. I remember mentally preparing myself for tons of my favorite characters to die, literally everybody who was in the room from the previous episode to die, and none of them did. I remember coming out of this episode feeling a bit relieved and a lot disappointed. I tried convincing myself for months, maybe even years, that this was indeed a good episode and everybody else was just wrong, but that's just not the case. I'm also not going to sit here and completely trash this episode either. Is it too dark? Sure. Is it unsatisfying? Sure. But there's a lot of things that this episode actually does well. I'd say equal to the amount of things that it doesn't do well. I will say that I have always loved the first third of this episode, so I am going to praise it, and if you're listening this far, then you're gonna listen to me praise it. If Miguel Sapochnik had his way, this episode all around would have been incredible. He directed Hard Home and Battle of the Bastards, but he also had a lot of great ideas for this episode, such as Nymeria and her wolves coming to help in the battle, more character deaths, and most importantly, actual fights against the White Walkers. Alright, I'm recording this from later, but I feel like I needed to be on camera for this one because what I'm about to say, I have almost zero evidence to back it up. Believe me, I have scoured the internet searching for more proof of this or just more screenshots or whatever, but what I have is all I have, and I guess you're just gonna have to take my word for the rest. But after this episode aired, I went to Vladimir Furtik's Instagram and I followed him, and that's the guy who's both the stunt coordinator of the show and also the man who plays the Night King. So every big fight, he goes on his Instagram, and I'll put some footage of that right now. He does some of the behind the scenes or some of the preliminary shots or just like the proof of concept for the fight with very minimal effects, and it's basically just people in, workout clothes, just choreographing the fight. So back in 2019, in one of these videos, there was a guy who had golden tinfoil wrapped around his right hand, fighting against another guy who had one of those ice swords that the White Walkers have. They were doing their fight, whatever, and then when the guy with the tinfoil right hand, golden tinfoil I should say, swiped across, the guy with the White Walker sword exploded into a million different iMovie ice cubes. In another video, there was a bigger woman fighting against another guy with, one of the White Walker swords, and when she swiped across, that guy disappeared into a million different iMovie ice cubes. So yes, what I am saying is, at the very least, there were choreographed fights for our heroes to fight against White Walkers in the long night. Now, how do I have even further proof of this? Well, because I think this was at a time on Instagram before you could direct message people, or if you could, I just didn't know how to do that. So I tagged my friend Scott in the comments, and I said, wow, Scott, this is nuts, because clearly they were supposed to be fighting against White Walkers. And Vladimir Furtik himself, the Night King, the stunt coordinator, liked the message that I had tagged my friend in. Again, I have no proof of this other than these two pictures that I had screenshotted back in 2019. They're no longer on his Instagram. HBO might have even seen my comment or just got angry at him for posting that stuff, so he took them down. So believe me or not, I am telling you that probably at some point in the script, our characters were fighting White Walkers, enough to the point that they had started choreographing those fights. Maybe they even shot those actual fights in the show, but even if they did, there's no deleted scenes of Jaime killing a White Walker or Brienne killing a White Walker. We were just this close, so believe it or not, I just feel like I had to be on camera for this one. I have to give credit to the White Walkers in this season. In this season, they were focused on being scary as a horror entity. You don't see them until the very end of the second episode and then in the third episode, and I loved this aspect of the season. The Whites seemed really cartoony in season 7. So we very purposefully don't see them here. We're meant to be afraid of them in this season and feel in the shoes of the characters, and I felt like this season did that accordingly. I wish that they had this same vibe, the same Hard Home vibe throughout the series, but this is something that Season 8 absolutely gets correct. The shot of the tidal wave of the dead crashing over the Unsullied has lived in my head rent-free since I've first seen it. I've referenced this in about a dozen videos about zombie movies and how to do zombies correctly, because this is terrifying. Now, a lot is said about tactics in this episode, and a lot of those criticisms are absolutely correct. This battle is full of awful tactics. Why keep your trebuchets in the field of battle and fire them only once? No idea. Why keep all of your forces outside of, at the very least, the trenches? No idea. This is where I would have loved some more conversations about the practicalities of this battle. Maybe there's too many people to keep inside the castle. Maybe there's not enough time to dig a second trench and they have to work with what they have. Stuff like this, simple conversations or just lines of dialogue would have gone a long ways. The first huge complaint is all about the Dothraki charge. And yes, them having zero plan to actually kill the whites until Melisandre arrived was inexcusable. That is so dumb, it's not even funny. But the charge into the undead, while stupid, I actually understand. This is meant to be a direct reflection of what happened in the previous season when the Dothraki charged in the battle against the Lannisters. They absolutely annihilated the Lannister army. This charge is meant to show us how formidable this threat really is. We've been told and we've seen how great the Dothraki are, so to open the battle up on them being seemingly eradicated is a great way to start off this battle. Is it smart? No, I'm not saying that, but what I am saying is I understand why it's here, and I don't think it's altogether that bad. And again, seeing them charge into the undead just to see a giant, and then all of the lights going out is just excellent horror. Seeing Jorah shake his head at Tormund also builds this next moment. I love all of this, I don't really care. Going along with this is Jaime seeing the dragonfire helping him, when the last time he saw this, he was at the opposite end of it, is such a great moment. And there's a lot of great Jaime moments in this episode. I'll touch on that in a little bit. People give Dany and the dragons a lot of flack in this battle, but what I didn't remember is that she is quite literally doing strafing runs the entire first half of this episode. If anyone, Jon is the one who just sits there and doesn't do anything while he says he's protecting Bran. One thing I did notice on this rewatch though, when the trench needs to be lit and they can't get a hold of Daenerys because she can't see them and the fire just starts going out, Jon is literally just sitting there watching them try to light it. It's absolutely insane. He's on a dragon. He should have just gone over and lit it himself. It's a ridiculous scene. Now, earlier in the video, I talked about how bad the Unsullied were against the Sons of the Harpy, but I don't know. I don't know what additional training they went through, but they absolutely redeemed themselves in this episode. They hold the line in the beginning of this episode. All of them giving their lives after Grey Worm has to cut them off is incredibly harsh, but also incredibly just overall honorable. But after this horror-filled opening, things kind of start to go downhill for me. The beginning of the second act also works, with everybody on top of the wall fighting to keep them back, especially that cool pulse-pounding song from Ramin Djawadi. The White Walkers also seem to have better tactics than the humans do, so I'll at least give them that. I especially love Jaime giving orders and seeing him and Brienne fighting together. This singular shot shows us Ice, the stark Valyrian steel sword, now cut in two, defending Winterfell against the Long Night, and I absolutely love that. Jaime is a commander. He's telling people what to do, giving the words of morale, and proving that he is a good commander, that people listen to him, and the simple fact that all of these people in Winterfell are taking commands from a Lannister is such a cool factor in this part of the episode. I also love that so many of these moments seem to just be kind of unscripted from the actors. They all look exhausted. They all look like they've been doing these takes and these battles all night long, and they have been for, I think it was like 52 nights in a row, and it seems like they're just saying what they think their characters would say, and the cameras just captured it. I love this. What I hate about this moment is how they set up all these traps for the whites just for them to entirely avoid the traps, and then the show never address it. Something like the scythe from the battle on the wall would have been cool here, or at the very least, it was open for more creative or elaborate traps, but they never really got into that. I used to compare this battle to the Battle of Helm's Deep because the showrunners actively invite those comparisons and think that they're wrong and it doesn't make sense, but structurally, I actually do think they are comparable. The battle is actively being lost at all points, but there's small moments of victory here and there. Melisandre lighting the trench, Arya coming in and giving the audience a bit of hope, but I've also come to the realization that the need to try and be like that battle actively hurts this episode. You have the women and children hiding below, which in the show makes no sense and makes everybody hiding in there seem like a complete idiot.
He's bringing all the dead people back to life, and they put the women and children in a crypt with all the dead people. So, rah. Tyrion is smart, but I guess not that smart.
But it needed to have that comparison to Helm's Deep. I ultimately wish that this battle tried to do its own thing instead of trying to be like Helm's Deep. The whole Arya stealth section is entirely skippable. Miguel Sapochnik talked about how the audience might have battle fatigue at this point in the episode, but you know what really works to avoid that? Raising the stakes, killing off characters, and also just overall making the episode shorter. And from here on out, the episode just becomes completely ridiculous and overall unsatisfying. Is Jon gonna fight the Night King? Nope, he's not. Oh, okay, so he's gonna fight this dragon, just like Aragorn fighting the troll. Oh, no, he's not gonna do that either. Oh, look at that, the people in the crypt come alive when the necromancer tells them to. Who would have thought? Arya gets a misspoken and retconned prophecy. Okay. The rest of the episode actively tries to go against what you think is going to happen, and that's not great. I've never been somebody who was upset that Jon wasn't the one to kill the Night King. I think it would have been incredibly obvious if he was the one who killed the Night King, and that would have kind of been also stupid. So what do I think should have happened? Well, I think we should have gotten a scene like in the trailer for this mobile game where Jon does fight the Night King. He takes the upper hand, so then the Night King raises his army so that way he can escape. Arya killing the Night King, yeah, that's fine, I guess, but the reasoning being that D&D just didn't want it to be Jon, so they chose somebody else, is absolutely nonsense. So who do I think should have killed the Night King? Well, I'm glad that you asked, because I've got two worthy candidates. Jaime Lannister killing the Night King would have made the entire journey beyond the Wall in Season 7 worth it. If Jaime was all that came from that expedition instead of the entire Lannister army, and he killed the Night King, that would have been incredible. Giving Jaime the double Kingslayer nickname, but this time it being a thing of honor in a place where nobody was on his side, would have completed his character arc beautifully, especially if he died in the process. Secondly, I think that the Hound would have been a great candidate to kill the Night King. He was also brought back for a reason. He saw visions in the flames. Imagine if he took Beric's burning sword or some other sword that was maybe Valyrian steel but burning. He would face his fear of fire and also complete his character arc by becoming the reborn Azor Ahai. Arya killing the Night King has no further meaning to it other than it just being unexpected. I actually remember my uncle told me that when he watched the episode, hi, Uncle Hugh if you're watching this, he said that what he thought happened, or that what he wished would have happened, was that Arya dropped the dagger to Bran, who then plunged the knife forward to kill the Night King. It would make this dagger have more meaning, the fact that he gave it to her in this exact spot, that it was the dagger meant to end Bran's life, but he used it to save the world. That would have been incredible. Another big fix, and I covered this earlier, but I'm gonna say it again, would have been to simply have our characters fight the White Walkers. If our heroes targeted them to take down the Whites and all those that they created, it would continue giving the living side a fighting chance. It would dwindle those numbers even after the Night King raised more dead, and it just all around would have been cool and satisfying to see, and that is not a bad thing. Would it maybe be fan servicey? Sure, but guess what? It would have been better than what we got. Fan service is not always a bad thing. The White Walkers ultimately don't do a damn thing in this battle and could have easily been left out. This, to me, is the biggest mistake of the episode. I do admire when Dany gets off her dragon, she picks up a sword and continues fighting. That is badass. The Night King by Ramin Djawadi is one of the most beautifully haunting pieces that he's ever made. In these final moments of the episode when that song was playing, I thought that it meant something big was coming, a big death, and I guess it did, but just not in the way I was expecting. I just remember everything about this moment. I remember listening to Alt-Shift-X's live stream afterwards and him thinking that maybe this was a red herring and the White Walkers would return by the end of the series. I remember the immediate dissatisfaction of this episode and how much it affected people. And if I'm being entirely honest, this episode could play out the exact same way, but if Jamie died, then I think this episode gets a full, at least point, rating increase. Jorah and Theon are the big character names that die, but they aren't really enormous deaths. They are, at the end of the day, still side characters. If Jamie died, then he would have the best character arc maybe of all time. But instead, we get what followed this episode. So we've reached the end of the show, because from this episode onward, this is just pure bad fan fiction. With everybody dunking on season 5 of Stranger Things recently, I have to say that that season is a goddamn masterpiece compared to these last 3 episodes. This is what I believe to be the worst episode of the entire series. From here on out, the writing takes a noticeable, even further dip than what was before. This episode is when things literally dive off a cliff. I talked about the 3-act structure earlier, and if we're going by that, then seasons 1 to 4 are the first act, the War of the Five Kings, the second act is the War against the White Walkers, seasons 5 to 8, and the third act is Dany taking the throne. And that is just simply 3, really 2 episodes of the series. This was never gonna work. And truly, when people talk about how bad season 8 is, they're talking about episodes 4 to 6, and I guess half of episode 3 as well. Even just this whole beginning funeral scene doesn't come across as powerful as the scene thinks it is. Despite Ramin Djawadi's best efforts, I just don't think enough people died for this to take up 5 minutes of the episode. The first half of this episode almost feels like part 2 of the first episode of this season. It's showing us more reunions, the happy moments, the first time interactions between characters, and some of this is cool. Gendry being legitimized and everybody drinking and celebrating. It's cool, but unfortunately, this is also where some of the worst writing of all time comes into play. Bran saying that he doesn't really want anything anymore, Tormund commending Jon for riding a dragon when he's literally done the same thing in the past, the Hound reuniting with Sansa and talking about her being weird and her saying that she's thankful for it, Dany being lonely and Varys taking this as a surefire sign that she's crazy, Tormund being a literal cartoon character being sad about Brienne. All of this is so over the top. This entire section is just D&D's wish fulfillment checklist and absolute bad fan service. And this is coming from somebody who doesn't hate fan service and thinks at times it's a good thing. The way this episode is doing fan service is certainly a bad thing though. Jon also pisses me off. And this is when I remember why I've felt the way I've felt about Jon for a long time. And it's a bit unfair, but ever since Jon got resurrected, he's literally just Ned Stark. He is honor and truth above everything. If he really does just want Dany as his queen, then he should just keep the truth to himself. But he doesn't do that. He reveals the truth to Arya and Sansa, off screen, by the way, which is just an absolute abomination of a decision, but this isn't even out of the sense that Jon doesn't trust Dany or that he wants to be king. It's not out of any semblance of Jon being a slightly interesting character, it's just out of the duty of being honorable and truthful, which is just so season 1. From this episode onward is when all of these characters just become Kevin from The Office. Everybody is a caricature of their past selves. The Bronn, Tyrion, and Jaime scene is laughably bad, a bottom 5 scene in the series. So Bronn literally goes from serving a different Lannister every couple of seasons, and then we're still supposed to be happy that he's around by the end of the series? No, it makes absolutely no sense. It doesn't even add anything to the series. His involvement, this scene, everything amounts to literally nothing. They want to have Bronn be the master of coin? Sure. He literally could have been absent from this entire season up to this point, and it would have been fine. Better, even. But to waste a scene with such precious time on this moment is again just absolute nonsense. And then, oh my god, there's Jaime leaving Brienne to go back to Cersei, which is just icing on an absolute steaming pile of shit of an episode that there ever could be. This goes against literally everything, any good storytelling, any good writer. You know what? I'm so mad, I can't even talk about this right now. Varys and Tyrion talk about how Jon should just marry Daenerys, and honestly, that would solve just about every single issue. So few people know the real truth about Jon, and even if fucking Sansa told other people, it would just be a rumor. Jon doesn't want to rule? Great. Marry your fucking aunt and let her rule while you command armies and sulk about or whatever you want to do. If it's for the good of the realm, do it. Duty and honor to family and the realm above all else, right, Jon? That's Jon's entire character arc. Well, I guess not if he just doesn't want to do it. Rhaegal's death is maybe the worst offense of the episode, and that is really saying something. The reason being that Dany kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet when they talked about them in the scene prior, how they literally pop out of nowhere and she didn't see them coming in the sky on a fucking dragon is just absolutely ridiculous. This is the worst episode of all of Game of Thrones by far. This is one of the worst written episodes of television of all time. This is horrible, and I'm sorry guys, I really did try to have this be an actual constructive criticism of the season instead of just a rant, but when something is this bad, there is no criticism. There's just anger. I used to think that Conlethil throwing his script was slightly exaggerated, but on a rewatch, after reading the book, seeing the moments where his character was built up further, I think he actually was pissed. I think he got fed a lie of a role that was gonna go somewhere just for this character to get careless and end on a bad note. Oh, it's kind of similar to, who's that other guy that died last season?
Stand by while thousands of men, women, and children burned alive. Would you have done it? Would you have kept your oath then? To be honest, I never really cared much for them. Innocent or otherwise.
Alright, now let's get angry again and talk about Jaime. To start a character off on such a hateful note, just to spend seasons to try and regain that trust and try to get others to like him and even love him, to spend the final season with him abandoning what he knows and loves for the good of the realm, to basically name an episode after him, just to go back on all of that and become the person he was back at the start. This isn't a character arc, this is a character circle. And not to get pretentious or like overly sentimental here, but what does this message send to the viewers? People watch this show, they consume fantasy stories, or really any stories, to get away from the real world, but they also look for characters that they identify with. What if there was somebody out there, actually I'm fairly confident that somebody probably even watching this video might have identified with Jaime Lannister. I'm not gonna ask you to comment or put out your whole life story, but maybe you weren't that good of a person in the past. Maybe you made some decisions that you weren't so proud of. Maybe you noticed that and wanted to take a turn. Maybe you did that, maybe even in part because of the inspiration you got from the character of Jaime Lannister. But his character goes back on everything and just reverts to who he was, and not because that was the message. Jaime isn't some allegory for addiction, and if he is, then it's some very poor interpretation of it. The reason why D&D had Jaime go back to Cersei was because it was unexpected. And that's it. Now maybe I'm looking too far into this. This isn't a Disney movie or some fable or MCU where everybody ends up okay at the end, and I get that, I do. But characters like Jaime mean something to people. These characters are few and far between, but these people who have these huge, monumentous character arcs hold such a great place in people's hearts. And for Jaime to ultimately just revert back to who he was in season 1 is a slap in the face to the fans, it's a slap in the face to writers everywhere, and ultimately, it's a slap in the face to George R.R. Martin. This will not be Jaime's character arc in the books. I used to say that Jaime Lannister was my favorite character of all time, and he probably would have if he had just died in episode 3. And at that, I am now officially done talking about Jaime for the rest of the video. So no, I'm not talking about this dumb fucking fight that doesn't make any sense because they're technically on the same side, or the bricks landing on him when if he just stood 2 feet to the left, he would have lived. Yeah, I'm not talking about that either. But once we actually get to King's Landing, the episode starts to actually get good. For one, there's of course Ramin Djawadi going absolute balls to the wall here, but there's also the same amount of build-up to some big grand event. In a weird opposite of The Long Night, I hate the first 2/3 of this episode, and I actually think that the last third is okay. If the majority of the last third of this episode happened with much more context added, many more episodes in between, then I think this actually works. I've never cared much about the Dothraki respawning. We see some of them coming back from the charge anyways, and everybody likes to say that doesn't matter when we literally don't see any of the Northmen or Unsullied or anything after the first 2/3 of the Long Night. The end of that episode makes it seem like the only characters that were left standing are the ones at the end, and that's just not true. In a season filled with as many plot holes and bad writing as Season 8, the Dothraki respawning is literally at the bottom of the list for me. But seeing the Lannisters lost, throwing down their weapons just for everybody to attack them anyways, the horror in Jon's eyes, having him kill one of his own men, seeing the Lannister soldier try to save people instead of fight, all of this stuff is excellent. This very much feels like it's directly from the mouth of George R.R. Martin. Something like this will be his scouring of the Shire. I don't think Dany will go full Mad Queen. I'm not even sure if the city will burn, but I think something like the good guys, the Starks, attacking the bad guys, the Lannisters, even though they've already lost, will absolutely happen. It will not be seen as this good thing from the audience or the character's eyes. Very similar to this episode, it will be on the verge between bittersweet and just all around tragic. But also, maybe a hot take here, I don't hate the idea of Dany turning into the Mad Queen either. Do I think it makes sense given her journey? Not at all. Do I think that more time would have made this transition better? Maybe? Literally less than 2 hours of screen time ago, Dany was completely fine. Her losing all of her allies over the course of this war and having no one to turn to and having another successor planned to overtake her is an absolute concrete motivation for her to turn evil. But again, we weren't given enough time for that to actually happen. One thing I would have liked to see here is Cersei give a hint of a smile at all of this happening. She hates the common people. She's blown up the streets before, and even just seeing Lena Headey give a bit of a smile would have shown that in her own way, she won. Because that is ultimately what this sequence proves. Cersei got the better of Dany. She got under her skin, she forced her down to her level, but that is just not something that this scene really focuses on. Again, if it did, that would have been another redeeming moment of the episode. Instead, we see Cersei afraid, which I guess also makes sense, because who wouldn't be afraid in this scenario? But if she was first happy and then the fear hit her, I don't know, I think that would have been better. So actually, I'd like to retract my statement here. I don't like the third act of this episode. I mostly like the second act, and only parts of the third act. And what makes me say that is that I completely forgot about Clegane Bowl. Now that it's been some time, I think some people who have binged the show might not even know this was a thing, but Clegane Bowl was this meme about the two brothers fighting like it was a meme like it was some dumb WWE matchup. People wanted to see it happen because it's just dumb fun, but honestly, even back when this episode premiered, seeing it actually come to fruition was so insanely dumb. What this scene says is that Sandor's big purpose, why he was brought back, was to come back and fight and kill his brother. This is also just the dumbest fantasy aura farming moment with a reveal that Gregor is now essentially the tyrant from Resident Evil. This is again just a bad way of showing fan service and just proves that Sandor, similarly to Jaime, can't let go of his hatred, can't become a better man, all because of something that happened in his past. If this fight happened just coincidentally, or like if this happened in the Dragon Pit in Season 7 when they were all meeting and both sides had to like separate them, that would have satisfied the meme and it would have allowed Sandor to go on and become a better character. It is funny that Arya could literally not be in this episode at all and it wouldn't matter or change anything whatsoever. Her moment with Sandor is great, but her running through the streets is just a way to show off some more of that area, and honestly, it could be cut out. We still see John in the streets and the horror of what's going on in the streets, so we don't need an additional point of view of all this. I truly think that there was a draft of the script where Jaime died in the long night, Arya came here wearing the face of Jaime, and killed Cersei. They could have made this so cool too. Maybe we didn't see Jaime actually die in the long night. Maybe he's in the last 2 episodes, but it's actually Arya wearing his face. I mean, they couldn't do, the stuff that they did in episode 4 if that was the case, but that would have been cool to see. If Arya and Jaime were never in the same place, something seemed off about Jaime, and it was because it wasn't him, it was actually Arya. This would have helped save both Jaime and Arya's character arcs, but this was the most popular fan theory at the time, so it was changed. But honestly, fan theories are there for a reason. It's for eagle-eyed fans to pick up on stuff, and yeah, now that they share it on the internet, it becomes really popular. But also, the internet isn't the majority of fans, believe it or not. I talked about this theory with my brother-in-law, who, by the way, loves Season 8, thinks that it was a really cool and great season, because he's the most chronically offline person ever, and he thinks I'm some genius who came up with these ideas for how to make Season 8 better, because he's like, oh, well, when you put it that way, the season maybe isn't that great. But he doesn't watch videos like this. He doesn't listen to any fan theories, and neither do a majority of people. Just because an idea is popular on the internet doesn't mean it's a bad idea to do it. Instead, we end up with the bells. I remember not being completely unhappy with this episode when it aired. I was already disappointed with the season, but I didn't feel like it was offensive like I think the last 2 episodes were. This has some good moments to it. The whole atmosphere around seeing Dany and what she thinks is built up very well. The horror of what she's done and the state of things is terrible. Her army and now Jon's army being at odds, all of this is handled extremely well. There's some cool shots, like this one, of course. I've always said that the season looks great, but what I ultimately have to mention here is the acting of Emilia Clarke. She really does seem like an entirely different character. I don't even see this person as Dany anymore.
I almost had to think of Luke as another character. Maybe he's Jake Skywalker. He's not my Luke Skywalker.
This is an entirely different performance, and knowing that she also wasn't too happy with this season.
Best season ever!
I can only imagine that this is almost like an extra meta layer of acting, that she is all too purposefully playing a different character. That's my headcanon, and I'm sticking to it. It makes sense why she was also nominated for this season, especially for this episode, knowing that this season and writing was in the gutter and still giving this incredible performance is amazing. And I'm pointing her out, but I'll just say the same for just about everyone. Arya saying that she knows a killer when she sees one might take the cake as the worst line of all time. Oh, you mean the person that just committed a assassination on a city is a killer? Yep, that makes sense. Thanks for pointing that one out, Arya. Dany seeing the Iron Throne in the same way she saw it in her vision in Season 2, just with a much higher budget, is a cool full circle moment. Again, with more time, this would have been even cooler. But ultimately, Jon has to kill Jake Targaryen here because she's absolutely insane. I don't hate Drogon burning the Iron Throne. I've never felt like it was because he understood the symbolism. I felt like it was because he was angry, wanted to vent, but didn't want to kill Jon because of the magical Targaryen connection. I always felt like this was clear, and I never had any issue with it. Again, there's lots of bad things in this season. This doesn't take high priority for me. Davos saying that the Unsullied or Grey Worm, oh my god, should go and start their own house is so stupid. It is widely known that they are all eunuchs. It's not like Davos is some uneducated person here who just said that. And if he was, then somebody should have corrected him. Edmure Tully being the butt of a joke is some MCU level shit here. Same with Samwell introducing the concept of a democracy. But the biggest joke is Tyrion, a prisoner, being allowed to talk and literally appoint the new king. Bran, because, you know, he has the best story. Again, all of this has been talked about and criticized before, so I won't get too in-depth on it, but if Bran will end up being king, this feels like the most corner-cutting version of that ending. Let's give Peter Dinklage some well-acted monologue to make it seem like it makes more sense, and it almost does. But when you stop to think about it, even for a moment, it doesn't work. The ending for most of these characters actually makes sense. I don't get how people say Jon should have killed the Night King and then went on to be king of the realm. In this story, where stuff never goes according to plan, him going north to be king beyond the wall also feels like it's something right from the mouth of George R.R. Martin. Arya going off on her own also makes sense, though I feel like her story will probably play out similarly to when Expedition 33 first landed. Sansa being queen of an independent kingdom feels a bit fanfiction-y. I don't think it'll happen, but I think it works for the show. Tyrion not being in the history book is also just hilariously stupid. I do wish that there had been some sort of like trial by combat for Jon against Grey Worm, and also some more answers, because this ultimately doesn't feel like a series finale. This isn't a happy or sad ending. It's not even really bittersweet. It's just confusing. Where did Drogon take Dany's body to? How on earth is Bran king? Does he live forever? What happens to the line of succession? What is ultimately the Three-Eyed Raven's plan? There's still so many unanswered questions here. This season has 6 episodes. One of them is fine, one of them is great, 2 of them are okay, and 2 of them are bad. Let's put this in my calculator here, and this season gets a flat out 4 out of 10. But here we are, 6 years later, 2 spin-offs later, and I'm still talking about this show. And, I mean, if you're watching the video, then you're still watching videos about it. All of the complaints in this video and in most other videos and most other talks online can be boiled down to one thing, and that's time. The actions of the characters didn't make any sense, because there wasn't enough time to show it correctly. There wasn't enough scenes of people traveling from point A to point B like there were in earlier seasons, while with the condensed episode counts, there wasn't enough time to show it. The dialogue between the characters felt a little forced and unnatural. Well, that's because with the amount of time that they allotted themselves, every single scene had to be about pushing the story, hurtling towards the end. George Martin has said that he wanted 12 seasons of the show, and had that happened, then perhaps we would have gotten to see his true version of the story. But what would the show have looked like if it had continued on? For one, it was already starting to take a long time between seasons. There was a 2-year gap between seasons 7 and 8, which by today's standard doesn't sound that bad, but again, by today's standard, that probably would have made the Game of Thrones seasons, and look at it with House of the Dragon, more spread out in between. All of this series was all pre-COVID. Post-COVID, the production of the show probably would have slowed down a lot, meaning that season 9 would have been released in 2021, and that's being generous. With the budget just continuously increasing, that would mean that it would be another 2 to 3 years between seasons. Add in the actor's strike and the writer's strike, and honestly, season 12 of the show might not even be out yet, or it might be coming out in 2026. So then the question turns to, would people still care? Would people still be wanting new seasons of Game of Thrones? Would the actors still be wanting to do the show, or would they be begging to have their character killed off? With the amount of time that it takes in between seasons, like look at what just happened with Euphoria season 3. I mean, there's that's a whole other bag of worms there, but a lot of the fan base kind of died off because it took 4 years to make a new season. If the same thing happened with Game of Thrones, would the audience still be there? Would it have continued exponentially growing, or would it, at some point around season 10 or something like that, would it have died off? Would the actors have really wanted to do 2 decades plus of this show? I can't really speak for them, but as a fan of the show, and speaking on behalf of the fans, I do think that there would still be an audience for a show like Game of Thrones. There is still an audience for a show like Game of Thrones by me making this video and the sheer amount of spin-offs that have come out and are still going to come out in the future. People care about A Song of Ice and Fire. They care about Game of Thrones, and they would care a whole lot more if they had an ending that it deserved. Even if the final season wasn't out yet, people would be looking forward to a proper conclusion. But the issue is not with the fans wanting more, not with the actors if they didn't want to come back or whatever. The issue is that two people wanted the show to end, and that's David and Dan. They ended the series on their own terms, and I usually say for better or worse here, but I really don't think there is a worse publicly that they could have gotten than this. Because of the ending, because of the backlash, because of how it's notorious it is for being terrible, you have to ask yourself if David and Dan were in over their heads. When they started this show, they had very few credits to their name, but they were passionate about this story, and I don't really blame them for trying to adapt A Song of Ice and Fire. In 2009, when they first met George, I'm sure they and George both thought the entire story would be done if and when they got to the present of George's work. But as we're all too aware, that didn't happen. And they simply were not prepared or equipped with the skills to handle a story of this caliber to the end. Game of Thrones was, and still is, the most popular show of all time. And when you put that in the hands of two inexperienced writers, then this is the ending that we get. Everybody, all the time, I've done it myself, they're like, man, if they would have given me that budget, I could have done a better job. But I am basically just as inexperienced as they were, and that's like me trying to handle the end of the biggest show of all time. I don't think I could do that either. Over the course of the series, David and Dan added things into the series and got high praise for it. Robert and Cersei's scenes, Arya and Tywin's scenes, a ton of scenes in King's Landing in Season 4, giving characters bigger roles like Robb, Oberyn, Bronn. It made people like them more. Cutting out certain aspects of characters to make them more likable gave them some more praise, and by the time Season 4 of the show was done airing, it seemed impossible for this show to fail. It sat at a 9.5 on IMDb. It became the most pirated show of all time, which is actually a compliment. It caused HBO to restructure its entire business model to start offering HBO Now or Max or whatever it was called back then, so that way more people could watch it and they could get more money. So where do you go when you are literally on top of the world? The only way to go, down. Season 5, while it didn't see a dip in viewership, it saw a dip in quality. Season 6, everybody really liked it when it first came out, but as the years have gone on, a lot of people coming back to it now have a bit more mixed feelings on it. Season 7 was kind of the same. Those two seasons on rewatch are just a bit less satisfying now that you know what's going to happen. And Season 8 failed in the most spectacular fashion anything has ever failed before, ever. So who's really to blame here? Is it David and Dan? Is it George Martin? Is it HBO? Well, weirdly, I'm actually going to side with the corporation on this one. HBO basically begged David and Dan to keep the show going for more seasons, but they didn't want to. So I blame David and Dan for probably about 60% of what went wrong with this series, but I do blame George Martin for the other 40%. Look, I don't know what's going on in this guy's personal life. I don't know what he's battling, if he's depressed or what, but my guy, it's been like over 20 years now since you've put out a book. Someone who was born the last time you published a mainline Song of Ice and Fire book is now almost able to drink in the United States and can drink elsewhere. Actually, let me revise that. I'm gonna give George 30% and then shift 10% of that onto HBO. They really couldn't do everything they could for this guy, give him the top of the line healthcare, or I don't even know, like buy the guy a planner to try and make things go out on schedule. I feel like they could have done a bit more. Some people are far too forgiving of George since he's an older man now. Some people are far too harsh on him because he's an older man and it's been 20-something years. But I do think that there is some middle ground there where in another universe, George liked what he was writing. He wanted to continue being an author and not just a television producer, but that's just not the world that we live in. Game of Thrones still might be one of the greatest shows ever made, but there's no denying that the show ultimately understayed its welcome in the cultural zeitgeist.
Maybe it really is all cocks in the end.